Pandora's box is about to open wide. Welcome once again to Pandora's Box, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have another special guest on the show, Mr. Thomas Radford. Tom is an expert forager from the UK who specialises in educating people on local, wild, seasonal and sustainable wild British food. He's known for his entertaining and informative social media channels, Eat the Country. Tom, thanks for coming on the show, man.
You're welcome, Calum. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so I've been following you for a couple of years now. I think you just popped up just randomly on my Facebook one day, and I thought this is a great, this guy does great stuff. It's like really sort of engaging and informative. I've sort of like always sort of been a little bit into foraging. I'm like really into my hikes, and always lived in Somerset and sort of hiked in the countryside. My missus is a very good forager and sort of grew up in a little village called Spaxton in Somerset, right next to the Quantock Hills, and would go out foraging with her dad when she was younger for like mushrooms and different things like that. So she's much more clued in than me, but I'm interested enough, as I said, in sort of like my nature and my wildlife that it is interesting to me, and I wish I knew more. So, but as soon as I saw your channel, I was instantly very interested, and then I sort of gave you a follow on Instagram sort of shortly after that, and I've sort of been watching your content ever since. When did you sort of get into foraging and stuff, Tom? Like sort of like, growing up, like where did you grow up and how did you get into foraging?
So I grew up in the New Forest in Hampshire, and always very out and about climbing trees, that kind of old-fashioned childhood, and I think when I was about 11 years old, someone gave me a copy of the SAS Survival Handbook by Lofty Wiseman, which was an absolute classic for kids. Well, not really for kids, it's full of all sorts of violent things, and which is why we loved it. It had all these ways to sort of kill a wild boar with a few sticks. Well, that sounds fun.
What more could you want as a young man?
Absolutely, and we were always heavy. I mean, of course, this is back in the day when you could be heavily tooled up and no one seemed to care. And I just, there was a section on foraging in there, and I just took an interest in it. And we tried the sort of basic things. We were eating like primrose leaves and found a few seps and that kind of thing. So I've always had a general interest in it, but that kind of went by the by. And then obviously, discovered beer and girls and life and all those things, and divorce and those exciting sort of life milestones. And then I got to so many years later. I mean, I was living in Singapore with my family, and I really was feeling very, very homesick for England. And there's a funny expat things. They always say, "Oh, you'll go and you'll come back." Or no, I'm never going to come back. And so I thought I'd got into filmmaking at that point. I thought when I get back to the UK, I'm going to do something in the countryside. And then and I did tried a few things with a few friends. And then when lockdown was sort of happening, and there wasn't much to do. I used to go up to my local park in Wandsworth, where I was living at the time. I just started making films about, and the reason I did the sort of death or dinner, which is what I do, was because most of the stuff you couldn't really eat. And so I thought, well, we'll talk about things you can't eat then, shall we? And it went from there. And I just suddenly found it very, very addictive. And one of the reasons that I do things the way I do them, I don't know if I'm jumping into your next question, but is that I was so sick of things, of certain, and I'm not going to name any names, but certain TV programs and things about the countryside, which I found incredibly dull and very misrepresentative of the countryside. And I thought, well, I'm going to do this. I'm from the sort of, Keith Floyd generation. And I thought, well, I'm going to make it fun. And if I want to be a bit rude, I will. And I'm just going to be honest and be myself. And that's basically what I try to be. It's just you talk about plants, but don't just be really worthy and earnest, have a bit of a laugh with it, because it is fascinating, but also very funny stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think your channel is very engaging. I think that's why it resonates with a lot of people. But I think, going sort of in hand with what you're saying as well, not a lot of these sort of, like highly produced TV programs about the countryside or nature, they don't actually go into that much information. Like I could find out more information about, what plants I can and cannot eat and things like that from scrolling through your Instagram for 5 minutes than I could watching 5 hours of BBC, wildlife shows probably.
Yeah, I mean, also it's about making information accessible and not being patronizing. And you see, I, as you can probably imagine, was not as particularly popular with my teachers at school. And then I spent, I don't really know, because most of the time I was standing outside the classroom. And then for reasons I still don't understand, I ended up marrying a teacher. So that was even more strange. So when
you like being told off, clearly, Tom. It's a kink. It's a kink.
What I do in my spare time is my business. But what actually happened? When I was doing this, I didn't set out to educate. I set out to just make films that I thought were fun and probably show off a bit, because people do. And when people say, "Oh, wow, you're a really good educator," I was almost horrified. I was like, "What? How dare you?" And then I realised that you are an educator, and people, because what you're doing is accessible and not, as I say, because teachers, not all teachers, but sometimes teachers can be patronising. Sometimes if they're following a curriculum or something, it can be a bit dull. And I just learn and explain things the way that I learn them. So I'll go out and I'll find a plant that I know, or I'll find a plant that I don't know, which is even more exciting. And I'll gen up on it as much as I can from various sources. And then I try and just explain it in a way where, because I love the folklore and everything, that hopefully makes the information stick, because there's all sorts of other stuff to go with it. This is why I do the sort of running joke about whether or not it was sacred to Druids and all those kind of things, because hopefully it makes the information stick. And I do get a lot of people saying, the way you educate is a particular style that works to me. I know it doesn't work for everybody, but and that's. I say it wasn't what I set out to do, but actually I quite like the fact now that people are learning and they're coming back to me and saying thank you, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds maybe a little bit contrived, but I think it is. It's that making education fun, isn't it? Because I mean, I didn't really like school. I didn't get much in school either. But I think I had this this bad sort of association with education that it almost like had to be boring, or I had this, I associated almost like unpleasant feelings with learning or education, and as a result, as a young person, you end up sort of rebelling against it, don't you? But then obviously when you get sort of later on in life, you naturally read up about things that you're interested in, and then at some point it dawns on you like, well, this is education. Anytime obviously that you're learning about anything you're interested in, you're educating yourself. But it's that I guess that formal idea of education. That's really interesting. I think it's interesting that you said you only really got into it around sort of lockdown. I assumed that you had like a much bigger background in foraging other than your SAS survival handbook. I thought that maybe you did something, in school or college or something, like followed that sort of route. So it's a very sort of a recent venture for you.
Yeah, I mean, I've always had I as I said, I spent my childhood in the New Forest, and a lot of time, in some ways quite a lonely childhood, although looking back on it, I think I was very privileged to spend a lot of my time walking around the forest on my own, climbing trees and stuff like that. So I had a good base knowledge of nature generally, and I'm always very comfortable with it. I mean, I can literally park my van and wander off into a completely strange woodland, even in the evening, and not feel the least bit scared or threatened or worried. It's just my natural environment in a way. And I think with the foraging, when you get a book like the SAS Survival Handbook when you're a kid, you get very much of this kind of like World War III mentality. You think, why wouldn't it be great to just be able to survive without without anybody else? I could do it on my own, and then I'd be like a hero. And when you're a kid, that's how you think. And I've always been fascinated by that idea. And of course, now that we're about to go into World War III, it's quite useful to have these skills. And
yeah, you'll be fine.
Bit of serendipity there. So I say, get me in your Rolodex. Get me in your Rolodex if it happens. Mm-hmm. I do. I mean, I've had people saying to me, "Are you a botanist?" I'm like, no, not at all. But like anything, if you really love something and you're really fascinated by it, you can absorb it very, very quickly. And I find that now when I go for a walk, it's almost like utterly addictive. But that being said, you have to understand something fully to be able to educate people in it. So I try not to. I have made mistakes in the past where I've sort of like said a few things and I've got them wrong, and now I'm trying to be far more careful not to do that. But yeah, I mean, and this is why I say to people say, how do you get all this knowledge? It's like, just go and get it. You don't have research, to, you don't have to do it all your life, because we live in the world of the University of YouTube, and I feel that anybody, and you Google and all the books that are out there, anyone can learn it and anyone can get to this level. You just have to really commit to it.
Yeah, and I just think it's like the hard thing nowadays. It's like the information's so readily available. It's just making sure that it's from a credible source. That's the hard thing nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah, you have to be. I mean, I get a lot of stuff from websites, but I tend to use websites that I know. I mean, it's not Wikipedia, put it that way. And also, another good thing to get is a circle of friends who are foragers. So if you're not sure of something, you can ask them. Because, I mean, there's this sort of adage about foragers people tend not to share their foraging locations, which I find silly, but they don't. But they're usually quite generous with their identification information. I mean, I get asked stuff all the time, and a lot of the time I know what it is, and sometimes I don't. But I always do what I can to use my sources to help people with stuff, because obviously, it can be life or death when it comes to foraging. So, but I still say that this information is accessible to everybody. You just have to. I did go to university and stuff. So one of the things about education is you have to understand the quality of your sources. So just if you are studying something, look at how it's written, whether it's someone's blog or whether it's actually a source which reputedly backs up by what it says. And there are certain websites. There's one called First Nature, which is very, very good. They go into they're quite boring, but they go into a lot of detail. So if they say it, it's usually something you can trust, for example.
Do you mind me asking, for people that are sort of maybe have been following you for a while that would be interested in some background information, what did you do in university and things like that, college, university?
Well, when I was 17, I wanted to go to art school, and I got a place, and my mother just said no. She said, and she was quite wise, because she knew I was lazy, but also she was an artist, and she said, be an artist by all means, but don't, for God's sake, try and do it for a living. And she was probably right. So I ended up doing geography, because I found geography, it was just something I was kind of interested in, but I found it quite easy. So it was quite an easy one. And I went to university at Glasgow. I don't remember much about the education side of it. I had a really good time. It's a great city. And then after that, because I'm not what you would call a career person. I did a lot. I was just basically temping for most of my 20s, and I was in bands. I used to write a lot of songs in bands and stuff like that. And then ended up getting kids the usual way. And
kidnap them.
Not with a pipette or something. And then had to work to, obviously when you've got kids. So I worked in IT for a long time in London, just doing IT support, which again, I treat my IT years like the Bourne Identity. It's gone. Occasionally I get flashes, but it's gone.
What's it like for you to look back on that time? Is it like, do you think sort of like, that was a boring period of my life?
Do you know, sometimes I think you can't live with regret. I still have very good friends from that period, and I had a good time outside of it. I lived in London for about 15 years. I had a really good time. If I look at my life now, I love being in the countryside, because it really, really chills you out, and it changes things. And I suppose when I got to Singapore, I was trying to find more jobs in IT. I didn't know what to do. And I ended up getting into a production company almost by accident. I applied for it. I didn't even know what a production company was, and got a job as a creative director quite quickly. And then I realized, this is a job. Making stuff up all day is a job.
That's crazy.
And so then I think to myself,
do you mind explaining a little bit more? Sorry to interrupt. Do you mind explaining a little bit more how you came in, how you fell into that? Because that's actually really interesting to me. To go from being an IT guy to just falling into that.
So I used to do a couple of things online that were kind of comedy news sites and stuff that were a bit edgy. But when I applied for this thing, I sent them links to it, so like I can write a bit, but I'd not really been paid for it. And it was just stuff I used to do a puppet show in my house and stuff.
It's great.
Like you do. Yeah. What happened? So. These guys, I just said to them, I want to be a producer. I didn't know what a producer was, but I thought, well, maybe I can do that. And they said, well, why don't you just come in? And because it's Singapore, which is quite chilled out expat thing, they said, the interview consisted of, do you like cigars? I was like, yeah. So we went that was it.
It's my kind of interview.
So we went for so we went for a cigar and a few beers, and then it was quite funny because we got there, and my ex was the reason we were there. She had a job as a teacher in school there, and she was expected to be working, and I was supposed to be looking after the kids. And literally day 2 in Singapore, I got a phone call from these guys. They said, "Oh, do you want to come in and start writing some scripts?" And so I got a job before she did, which was funny. And I thought script writing. I thought, well, how hard can it be? And it's just like corporate scripts, So I just blagged it, and it seemed to work. And then I got involved in other little filmmaking things, just kind of, they said, we need someone to go down and direct a shoot. I'm like, all right, I don't know what that means, but I'll have a go. I know it sounds flippant, but this is absolutely true. I had no idea what
You're like a professional blagger, Tom. Professional blagger.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then 4 months in, the guy messaged me and said, we want you to be the creative director. And I thought, all right.
Sounds good.
Basically from then on, I was overseeing scripts and making creative concepts, and then I was directing commercials. And the funny thing is, and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried anything like that, but I used to turn up on a film set, and there'd be like 15, 20 people. I don't know what any of these people are or what they do. And I thought the only way I can cope with this is I put the camera in front of me, and if I don't see down that little square what I've got in my head, then someone's doing something wrong and someone needs to be shouted at.
Yeah, of course.
But I don't. And that's how I did it. And actually, it was quite an interesting. It was quite exciting, scary, but quite an exciting time. And so. But because I'd got into content making, when I got back here, I mean, I keep my content very simple online. I think it needs to be. You don't want to be too flashy with your stuff on social. But I have a very clear sense about what I want to do. And also, when I was in Singapore, I did a bit of voiceover work and stuff. So I got used to sort of just, talking, on camera and on deadlines and things like that. So it was a real good learning curve for what I do now. But the thing was, I wish I'd known this job existed when I was 20, because then I could have done it all my life. But, you can't have regret. Better late than never.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. I see that you're in your van a lot, sort of on your social media. Do you live in a van now, or do you just sort of have one and sort of go about in it?
Last year, I mostly lived in it. Mm-hmm. I'm very fortunate at the moment. I'm living in a converted shipping container in northern Oxfordshire that belongs to a friend of mine. It's all kitted out, and he's a client as well. The van's parked outside, and I love the freedom of it. I don't know if you've ever done any van life.
No.
But it's a fantastic thing. I mean, I know they're trying to crack down on it, but it's a fantastic thing. I'd always thought about doing it, and I picked up this van. I managed to get it quite cheaply for under $6,000, because I mean they're going for a fortune, these things, because they've got COVID. And I just thought, and there's an app called Park for Night, which basically allows you shows all the places you can park for free. And I just went off, and all these places that I'd wanted to go, I hadn't been for ages, like Dorset and Cornwall and stuff. I would just go down there, wake up in the morning with the most spectacular views and a cup of tea, and I thought, well, this is free. It's a wonderful feeling. So I did it for a lot of last year. When we got into the winter, I have an ongoing dispute with my diesel heater, and it generally, I swear at it a lot because it's got a real attitude problem. And when there's a heavy frost, it just is not fun in a van. I mean, when you're in the sleeping bag, it's fine. When you get out, it's not. So I sort of, when this opportunity came to stay in this place, I thought, that's great. Because I can film in here. I've got all my green screen stuff and everything behind me and stuff. So, but the van lifing thing is really good for making content, and it's just really, really good fun. And it's becoming quite exciting about the fact that when you go to a new place, I mean, I was in Shetland last week, and I was in Yorkshire, and you don't have to worry about accommodation, and I really like that. Yeah,
it's amazing. I can imagine it is so freeing. I'm at the stage that you were at, when you were sort of in your IT days. So I've got like a young daughter at home and stuff like that. So I can't really just, move around the country and stuff like that. I need to have like a stable job and sort of be in one place for the time being. But I am very sort of intrigued by it, and I know a couple of people that do it. I can imagine how freeing it would be. What are your favourite places in the UK that you've sort of like travelled to and woken up in your van?
My favourite county is probably Dorset. Because I love the West Country, but I find Dorset's kind of the sort of like the slightly naughtier, poor cousin of the West Country, and I love that Jurassic Coast down there, and I think maybe I'd like to live in Dorset. But then, I mean, recently, actually, I went up to Yorkshire, and I didn't know Yorkshire very well, and I stayed at a place up in North Yorkshire, and then weekend I was in Whitby, and that's Yorkshire is beautiful. It's a fantastic part of the world, really, really lovely. Another place, I went to the Peak District, which I hadn't been to before, and that's really amazing. And also parts of, because I went down the Wye Valley in Wales. I'm half Welsh, and I don't know Wales that well. Pembrokeshire and a bit, and again, just stunning places, and also, so it's just, those are the kinds of places I like. But I also like to. I'm quite, when I'm in the van, I'm quite private, and I like to just find nice, quiet woodlands to park in. And there's a lovely little spot I found. I don't know if you know the area around Hampshire and Portsmouth, but there's a little place kind of called Beacon Hill. And there's a quiet little car park there. And you can get up, and in the morning you can walk, and you can see all the way across the south coast and down to Southampton Water and there. And it's all places that I grew up, and I now see them all in context. And so those kinds of places I love. I mean, one of the best spots I found, though, is the one in Dorset, where you can see right the way down Portland, all the way down Chesil Beach to Portlandville. And again, that's just one of the most beautiful sites in the country, in my view. Yeah,
I think that I completely agree with you about Dorset. I think Dorset, it's almost like forgotten about a little bit, because everybody, I think, around the country knows about and harps on about Cornwall. And don't get me wrong, Cornwall's a very nice place, but whenever I go there, my missus's sister lives in Cornwall with her partner, and whenever I go down there, it's especially in the summer months, it's so busy. All the beaches are heaving, all the towns are heaving, and I think because obviously there's Falmouth University there and things like that, I think a lot of the local Cornish people get so fed up, whether it's of university students or people coming there on holiday, that there's I've got a friend from Helston who now lives in Somerset, and he even said, I can't remember what it is, but they've even got like a name for people that aren't from Cornwall that spend all their time in Cornwall, and it's like an old sort of slang Cornish term, like a slightly derogatory term to like make fun of people that spend all their time in Cornwall that aren't from Cornwall. I can't remember what it is now. But Dorset, you go there, it's nowhere near as busy. It's got sort of all the same sort of pros as Cornwall. Just absolutely stunning countryside. I think it's only one of only 2 counties, is it, in England that there's no motorway going through. So when you're there,
there isn't. Yeah, Cornwall's the other one.
Oh yeah, no, that would make sense. Yeah, Cornwall and Dorset. But so when you're there, it's lovely just driving around. It's just A roads and B roads, very sort of relaxed feeling. I have some family in Dorset, and I went there last year for about 4 or 5 days, and it's an absolutely lovely county. I think Yorkshire. I think I completely agree with you. Yorkshire, lovely place. I think Cumbria is a really nice place as well.
I've driven through Cumbria. I don't know that well. I think I agree with you on Dorset. It's about the numbers. I mean, the thing about Cornwall, there's a lot of resentment down there towards second homers, and I can understand that because I went down to, because speaking of Helston, I used to go, when we were kids, we used to go to a place called Porthallow, which is about 10 miles from Helston. And I went down there again, actually during lockdown. There was sort of like a sort of gap when you could sort of travel a bit, and I went down there. And all of the houses that used to belong to the fishermen are now all second homes, and the place is dead.
Yeah.
My view on that is, if I did decide to live in Cornwall, I would live in Cornwall, and I would get involved in it, and I'd be part of the community. If you're going to do it, do it. I think it's, and so I do understand the resentment. I mean, I think that it's difficult to resent tourism because they're so reliant on it.
Yeah, sure.
But
sure.
I mean, if you're driving a van down a road in Cornwall or Devon in the summer, it is an absolute nightmare. It's a nightmare anyway because I'm a crap driver. But I was in Devon. Where is it? North Devon is the most dangerous place to drive in, apart from Italy, in the world, I think. And I was in a van. I went down to this. I thought I'd have a look at this little seaside village, and I drove down. And it was pretty steep going down.
It's not Clovelly, was it?
It was about a 1 in. I can't remember what it was called. Tiny little place. Yeah. Could have been. Yeah. And it was. And then on the way out, it's about a 1 in 4. And my handbrake, I thought, if this goes, if I start rolling, that's it. I'm going down the hill. So I was absolutely terrified. Yeah. When I got to the top, I was like, and then I went down this road that took you out of the area, and it was the narrowest road. I mean, literally, my wing mirrors were brushing against the hedges either side. And then I probably met the largest tractor in the west of England coming the other way. And by the time I got out of there, I thought, well, this isn't fun. Whereas in Dorset, the roads are wider and there's lovely views. I mean, it's hardy country. When you go over, there's a place called what is affectionately known as Cloud Hill, because it's often in cloud. And you go up and you come down and you get this patchwork of fields going out. And then, of course, when you go down to, I mean, unfortunately, Doledor's got a bit touristy now, but Doledor, Lulworth, and it's just, and I like to go a bit, I don't know if you do a bit of fishing. I go down to Chesil Beach to do a bit of mackerel fishing, and that's a magical place. It's really rough, particularly go there in like late spring when there's not too many people and it's kind of rough weather. Really, really fantastic place. So, and I've also got friends in Sherborne, which is inland, a bit further north.
Sherborne's a lovely place.
That's a town I thought about living in Sherborne.
Yeah.
I love the history.
It's actually
I don't know if you.
It's in Somerset, isn't it, Sherborne? I think it's on the.
Not quite. It's very close to the Yeovil's in Somerset, which is about 10 miles away. So it's very close. But there's a wonderful thing. They've got this abbey there, that used to be a cathedral, and it goes right back. Parts of it go right back to the time of Alfred the Great. And they've got a glass thing where they found the grave of one of his brothers, I think it is, and you can actually see the bones through the glass in the bottom, which is to be that connected to someone like Alfred the Great. Yeah, to me, amazing. I'm a big history nerd, and I was amazing, really fantastic,
Yeah, me and you both. No, I went to Sherborne about well, it's probably about 8 years ago now. But I mean, I think they've got 2 castles there. They've got one that was wrecked during the English Civil War, and then they got one that was built just after. I went to the sort of old wreckage, the National Trust site. It's a lovely place, and it's a very sort of cobbledy, streety town, isn't it? Where you walk through, and there's lots of old Tudor buildings and lots of like little, unique sort of like tea and coffee shops and stuff. So it's a really nice sort of place to go for a day out. If you're sort of a National Trusty person, I guess. Not if you're like some 18-year-old raver.
You can also get beer for £3 a pint in one of the pubs.
Can you? What? How is that?
Yeah.
How is that a thing?
Because that's actually what beer costs.
Oh, right.
Don't tell the people who are charging you an extra £5 for it in London. Sure. But that's actually what beer costs. I mean, it's local beer, like Otto. That's nice.
Yeah.
But I mean, so that's another good reason to go to Sherborne. Also, I like Sherborne. I always say Sherborne is nicely balanced. Because it's got an Aldi and a Waitrose, so that's kind of that's how you make it. Not too up its arse, not too dodgy, just a bit of both.
Do 85%? Yeah, 85% of your shopping in Aldi, and then the 15% of like the really good stuff you want. Pop to them in a Waitrose afterwards for that. That's the key.
And never ever go into Waitrose when you're hungry. Because you'll spend £45 on lunch. Yeah, just
bankrupt yourself.
You walk past the deli counter in Waitrose when you're hungry. It's all game over.
Have you explored places like Scotland at all, or is that on the bucket list if you haven't? Or?
I've just come back from Scotland. I've got friends. I drove all the way up to Aberdeen. I've got a friend up there. Because I went to university in Glasgow, so I know Scotland quite well, particularly the West Coast I know very well. I don't know the East Coast so well. And my old bucket of bolts van got me up there, and it was actually lovely because then he had a client in Shetland, and they're setting up the first distillery in Shetland. He's got a woodworking company, and they're making one of these tasting tables for him. So we went all the way up to Shetland, not in the van, but and then it was really nice. Shetland's amazing. There's not a tree on the whole island, but it's a really nice place. Unfortunately, there was a 5-metre swell on the way back, so I lost my dinner. It's a really interesting. But then on the way back, I went down through the centre of Scotland, through Perthshire, and I met these amazing people who do this stuff called Birken tree. It's basically birch sap water, and they tap it straight out. And they don't pasteurize it; they boil it a little bit, and then you drink it with whiskey. And what's great about it is when you drink it with whiskey, you've got that lovely sort of feeling of having cooling it down and stuff, but it doesn't dilute the flavour at all. So it's like having a huge big glass of whiskey without it being actually having a huge big glass of whiskey, and that was really fascinating. So I love driving around Scotland. It's a lot of people I know in England have never been, and if you've gone out of Glasgow and you've driven up the west coast through Glencoe up to Oban and up there, I mean, it is absolutely jaw dropping.
Yeah.
Do you know Scotland well?
Not well. I've been to Edinburgh a couple of times, but funnily enough, like this year, I'm planning to go sort of like take like a whole week off work and go wild camping in Scotland for a week.
Do it. Yeah. Absolutely do it.
Brilliant.
Just look out for the midges. Depends on the midgie time, because that can be rough.
I have heard that, but I think sometimes you just sort of got to go in for a penny, in for a pound, and just sort of not worry too much about these things. Not that I'm eager, obviously, to get bitten from head to toe by midges, but I think sometimes you just got to do it, haven't you?
It's not the biting. You can't see where you're going and you're breathing them in. I mean, there's just the whole air is like full of them. But the advantage of Scotland is it's quite windy a lot. So if you get West Coast is better because it's a bit more windy. And obviously, if you park right next to a loch, you've got what's coming to you. But it is, when it's sunny up there, it is. I mean, it's just like there's nowhere else like it. I mean, Glencoe. I remember the first time I went through Glencoe. To be fair, I was very stoned. And don't worry, I'm not a teacher. I don't have to worry about this stuff. We were literally driving at 4 miles an hour, just going. Because
as you do,
because these those mountains are far older than the Himalayas, much older than the Himalayas, and so they have this wonderful. You can feel the energy. Sometimes, and it sounds a bit woo-woo, but I mean, like if you go to Standing Stone, sometimes you can almost feel the vibration of them. It's got that. They're all moss covered, and it's wonderful,
Ancient
wonderful.
Land.
But yeah, so you'll have a brilliant time.
Yeah, I'd love to go kayaking there as well, because some of the lochs just absolutely stunning. I've seen some of the pictures in summertime. Loch Lomond and other places like that. You just see these stunning lakes surrounded by sort of trees with mountains in the background. It's like something from Lord of the Rings. It's just fantastic.
Well, they have. I mean, they have these islands on the locks, and I've never actually been to any of them. I have a friend of mine who does. He's got one of these really cool not life rafts, like inflatable rafts, but they're small enough to wrap up and put on the front of your bike. But it's actually a really solid, strong thing, and he'll literally just go out in Glasgow with some friends, and then drive up to the side of Loch Lomond, literally in the dark, and him and his mate will just paddle out to an island and camp.
Yeah.
And Scotland doesn't have any trespassing rules. There are some rules depending on camping and stuff, but generally speaking, they're absolutely fine. And that's what's so wonderful about it, as long as you don't abuse it. I mean, the problems I get, with van lifing it and stuff, is that people beep at you and stuff like that, because there are people that fly tip and people that abuse it. And I was brought up, with the countryside code, where you don't litter and you don't do so. And I feel that I'm sort of going off point a bit, but it's one of the things I feel they should be teaching in schools is the country code, because I sometimes park up somewhere, even by the side of a main road, where I just want to have a sleep for a bit or something, and there's a big bin there, and yet all around this bin is rubbish. And I just think, how hard can this be?
Yeah, no, exactly, yeah. It's like, and that's the thing as well. I mean, there's a difference between being naughty. I always tell my daughter, do you know what I mean? It's like, I always say that she's naughty but nice, and I say, look, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're naughty but nice, I say, I always say, me and mummy are naughty too. But there's a difference between being naughty and just like, at the end of the day, with things like...
You do talk to your daughter about strange things.
Well, when you're like trying to explain to your children the difference between right and wrong and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? But what you're getting at...
It sounds like modern parents from Viz.
Yeah. But what you're getting at about like littering though, at the end of the day, it's like, look, just put it in the bin,
Completely. I mean, I used to, when I was in Singapore, they'll put you in the newspaper if you get caught littering. It's a very, very draconian thing there. They have a thing, because obviously, there's famously chewing gum is, actually you can have chewing gum, you can't buy it there, you can bring, but if you drop chewing gum, you're in trouble. And when you want to buy a property, a period property is one that's got chewing gum on the step. So you can actually measure how old it is. But no, I agree. I mean, I think, there's naughty and there's nice. And I think there's just certain things that you just mustn't. I mean, I was in the New Forest last summer when foraging with a friend of mine, and we just pulled up in a little car park, and there's just literally someone's offloaded half their kitchen in this corner. And I think, and I'm not casting aspersions, because it could have been anybody. I don't know what kind of person does a thing like that, but it just makes my blood boil. Come on.
Well, yeah,
because I get moved on, and I never do that.
Well, yeah, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? That's what you were saying about Singapore. That's one thing I really like about the Isle of Man as well. My granddad's from the Isle of Man, and you go there, and they've got really strict litter rules, because obviously they've got their own government in the Isle of Man. It's quite a fascinating place, really. It's quite a very interesting place in the British Isles, and I think
I've never been actually. I'd be fascinated to go.
I was going to say it's a little bit like Dorset, where I think it sort of looks overlooked, and unless you're like myself and randomly have a family member that's from there, people maybe might go through their whole entire life living in the UK and never go there. But it's an amazing place. It's got really interesting history and culture, and some absolutely beautiful beaches, beautiful inlands, like mountains, like Snaefell, for example, on the Isle of Man. It's the only place in the whole of the UK where you can see Wales, Scotland, England, and Ireland at the same time. You can see Snowdonia in Wales, and I can't remember exactly where in Ireland and England and Scotland you can see, but it's a beautiful place. It was sort of taken over by the Vikings in about 800 AD, I believe, by a guy called Ori the Dane, and so their culture is very interesting. It's about 50% Gaelic, 50% Viking, and they really sort of cherish both of those heritages. But fascinating place. I think for someone like you, you'd absolutely love it, because it's insanely rural. I mean, as you can imagine, they don't have like their idea of a main road is our idea of like a B road, in the Isle of Man.
Does it have a sort of Wicker Man vibe, or?
Yes, I would say, but in a nice way. So, but I would say like in a nice way. So I think it's something startling, like something crazy, like 70% of people in the Isle of Man still believe in fairies. A lot of the older generation still leave like milk and biscuits out for the fairies every night, because they believe that if you don't, then like bad luck will come to you. They've quite famously got like the fairy bridge in the Isle of Man. There's actually two. There's the one more touristy one, which was sort of made as like a tourist thing, I think sometime about 100 years ago. And then there's the original one, which is a bit more out of the way. But they strongly believe, when you go over the ferry bridge, you have to sort of acknowledge the fairies, just sort of say like, hi fairies, and if you don't, that's like bad luck will come to you. I say it's a fascinating place. Fascinating place.
That's interesting. I mean, I like that kind of stuff. I mean, one of the great things in Shetland is they have this, I can't remember the name of it, they have this amazing Viking festival, I don't know if you've seen it, where everyone dresses up and they burn a boat and all those kind of things, because it is a very Viking place. And I being a sort of about as lapsed a Catholic as you could possibly be, take a view that I like people upholding those kind of ideas. You know, I mean, there's some crazy stuff with it, but because most of those religions have a deep respect for nature, so I'm right behind them in that regard. And yeah, I think the Isle of Man, because I mean, obviously it's known as a tax haven, but I mean, I don't think it's quite as I recently was it last year I spent a bit of time in Guernsey, and that has got quite a strange vibe to it. And I would like to see Isle of Man, because Isle of Man's quite a bit bigger, isn't it? It's quite a reasonable size.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's all relative, isn't it? But I think it's one of the, if not the biggest isle.
What does that mean? Everyone's married to everyone.
yeah. I want to say it's the biggest isle in of the British Isles. I'm pretty sure.
I think it's bigger than the Isle of Wight, isn't it?
Yes,
it's bigger than the Isle of Wight.
Yeah, for sure. I can't remember. I think it's something like 40 miles from say like south to north, something like that. But it's an amazing road, and obviously it's famous for its TT. But I mean, you can drive on what's called like the mountain road from Douglas to Ramsey. Douglas is the east coast, so if you catch the ferry from Liverpool, you'll get to Douglas first, and Ramsey is the northern town. But if you take what's called the mountain road from Douglas to Ramsey, I mean, I think it's worth anybody doing, because you drive up, as the name implies, like through the mountains, and if it's often very sort of like misty and atmospheric in the Isle of Man, which sort of helps give it this sort of like magical vibe. And you're just driving through. It's quite dodgy in a way. You can tell the locals are all used to it because they just absolutely bomb it. Because that's another thing about the Isle of Man. They don't have speed limits. They don't have like speed cameras or speed limits or anything like that. But a lot of the mountain road, it's not very, it's not like they've got like really sturdy barriers or off the edge or anything like that. So if you tumbled over, if it was a bit foggy, then that would probably be the end of you. But it's an absolutely stunning drive. Absolutely stunning drive.
Yeah. I mean, is it going to be the Isle of Them soon, or are we sticking in?
Let's hope not. If any place was going to remain not the Isle of Them, it would be the Isle of Man, because as you can probably imagine, they're about 100 years behind the mainland. But that's one of the things I like about it. I go there and I feel like I've sort of gone back in time. Everything's sort of very black and white. They're stricter in a lot of ways. So, for example, I think the only band in the Isle of Man, they really used to be really proud about giving people the birch. Give them the birch. So up until about 1985, it was only 1985 when giving people the birch was actually banned, and it was really, like, people in the Isle of Man, like most of the people were absolutely outraged that it was banned, because up until that point, it was very common, if you broke certain laws, if you did whatever it was deemed bad enough, you would be tied up, you were in the Napoleonic War or something like that, and then you would be whipped with the birch until you were bleeding, however many lashes, depending on whatever crime you did.
Crikey.
So it is a very old-fashioned place. As I said, I can't remember the fines you get for littering over there. They're obviously plastered on the bins and stuff like that, but it's like 10 times more than you'd get done for in say like England, and they're much more strict. Like the law is much more strict over there. But as a result, you don't see any litter, and people are a lot much better behaved. It's not very often you hear about many crimes being committed on the Isle of Man.
Well, I mean, I think in Singapore they still have the birch. In fact, I think it's worse than the birch as well. But it is almost a crime-free place. I mean, I'm not. Obviously, endorsing something quite as draconian as that, I don't know. I mean, but I do think now that there don't seem to be. When I was at school, obviously it was a very different time. It was terrifying. I was at a private school in Southampton, not a particularly good one. And yeah, they used to they'd hit you with rulers, and they had straps and all these kind of things. And whilst I hated that, I do feel. I remember when my ex-wife had a job in a school in Lambeth. And I'm not sure which government was in at the time. I can't remember, but there was some rule where the kids could actually legally say the F word 5 times in a class without being thrown out. And these kids were aware of it. So I thought, well, can you imagine if I'd known that as a kid, I'd have walked in and be like, "Morning, F, 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 F," and at the end of the lesson, when the bell rings, I'd go, "F you, miss," and walk out.
Yeah, you would, yeah.
Because you knew you could, and I thought, how have we got to a point? I'm not saying that some of the dreadful things that happened they used to beat us up in my school. I think those things are way out of order, but I do feel that there's no need for kids these days, but there's nothing to be, not even any discipline anymore. If you don't do your homework, it's just said, oh well, never mind.
Yeah,
I got suspended for not doing my homework. Repeatedly, to be fair, but
I think it's all about consequence and incentive at the end of the day, isn't it? I think that there has to be consequences for your actions, and I think it's very important to teach people consequences for their actions, isn't it? Like children growing up, there needs to be consequences for your actions, and there needs to be incentives to be whatever. You know what I mean? So incentive, to do a certain thing, or to like be a quote unquote good person, whatever that is. Do you know what I mean? There needs to be some sort of incentive for it. If you take away all the consequences and incentive, then you're just left in this weird society where everyone's just sort of doing what they want with no consequences, and things are like inevitably gonna go downhill as a result of that, aren't they?
I don't know how it works in the workplace. I mean, I'm a freelancer. If I have to bring on a freelancer to work for me on something, they need to be able to get it done. And if they've got it wrong, I need to be able to tell them they've got it wrong. And if we're in a situation where you can't do that, I can't afford to have that situation happen. So the reason that we, as you say, when we were kids, school was boring. We didn't like school. But what we did learn was how to stick with something and how to respect authority, I suppose, even though that authority was always sometimes a bit questionable. If you cannot respect authority and you cannot follow rules, you can't make a living. You have to at some point, and obviously, not that you have to be abused or have people that are rude to you and stuff, but and I do find that a very strange thing, and it's something that I encounter a lot on social media as well. I mean, there is quite a lot of blatant, almost like very childish rudeness and casual verbal abuse or written abuse as you get online and stuff. And because a lot of these accounts are anonymous and stuff, people have got into a habit of literally just going online and writing the first horrible thing that comes into their mind. And
are you talking about to yourself personally or just things that you've witnessed?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, really?
I mean, there's one particular example. I made a film about the Amanita muscaria mushroom, which is the red and white mushroom. And it has although it's still, even Paul Stamets can't tell you exactly what it is about it that has a psychedelic element to it. They say it's muscimol. But anyway, there's all these stories, and they are stories, truth and stories, about how, the reindeer would eat the mushroom, the reindeer would wee onto the snow, then the people would eat the snow, and then there's the whole flying reindeer myth came from that. And then there... Well, yeah, exactly. All the presents under the tree, like the little coloured mushrooms under the tree. But then there was this other story, which is, I believe, from Siberia, and I'd say Paul Stamets was talking about it this week, about how the shaman or the holy man, whoever he was, would eat the mushrooms himself, and he would, because he was a shaman, he would take the consequences of the poisonous mushroom, and then he would wee into cups or something, and people would consume his urine, and get high that way. And all I said was, how badly do you want to get high that you drink a cup of old man's piss? Which I thought was a fairly...
Yeah, it's hilarious.
I thought was a fairly obvious... Because, a lot of things in history were done wrong, and we've changed, Now, obviously, one person says it's a spiritual journey, the other person says it's high, and I appreciate the difference there. But I got absolutely bombarded. I was accused of all kinds. Americans were going for me like mad. It just turned into a war zone. I just walked away from it. It was just like, I'm probably picked up about 60,000 followers from that, because it just went mad, this fight. And I just thought, look at it in context. I'm talking about history. People don't drink urine anymore. No. Perhaps they did then. Now they probably take it in pill form or something. Yeah.
Pill form urine.
Just any excuse. But yeah, exactly. Have you had your piss pill this morning? It's I'm just trying to market that, can't you? It just people are just looking for a reason to go for it. I don't. I'm very careful on my channel. I don't talk about politics. I don't care about it. I don't talk about religion. I don't talk about any of those kinds of things. But people they're almost conditioned now to sort of just, to feel like because they have a social media channel, they're like a little TV show, and they can basically just go this attack. And they say things, and I think, you've written that down, don't you? Some of these things, you've written this stuff down, and at some point this may come and get you. And I just think, I tend to ignore it now, but when it first started happening, I was a bit kind of, whoa, blooming heck, that was a bit much, Yeah. Do you encounter this kind of stuff? I don't know.
We have had it in the past, yeah. I say this. The thing is, I think when you experience it yourself, it seems so out of left field. doesn't it? And some of the stuff is so over the top, so over the top and aggressive for what it is. So, let's face it, we're all human beings. Sometimes we will say something like you said earlier on. You might accidentally say the wrong thing about unintentionally give out some misinformation about something. We've done that several times, either myself or one of my co-workers on the radio or on like our podcast, and the type of comments we've got for it, going on about how we're absolute morons, how ridiculous we are, how stupid, and like really patronizing, like obviously it's this, blah blah. Why don't you do your research before you chat? And it's like, look, when we do these things, we're pretty much just pressing the record button and then we're having a chat. And then sometimes, sometimes will accidentally, you'll accidentally say the wrong thing. Or sometimes you'll just have a brain fart and you've thought that you've said the right thing, but actually the wrong words come out. I mean, I do that sometimes. And you don't even realise until afterwards that you said the wrong thing. But it's like to hold people like so ridiculously accountable in such an aggressive way for something which was just basically an honest mistake is just... I mean, I think... Well,
you don't have some big disclaimer saying that everything we say on this thing is factual.
Yeah. And I would encourage everyone to fact check everything they hear or read, because that's just common. That's just good practice to me. That's how you end up with...
Well, I mean, the next thing is to start walking around the pub and hear people having a conversation and stop. Sorry, what you just said to your wife isn't actually factually correct.
Yeah.
You might as well interrupt every single conversation ever had. Just because, I mean, I know there's that famous line from the social network, the internet's written in ink. And I suppose if you say something online, it's kind of, but it is just a conversation. I mean, the thing about foraging, for example, it's a very, very broad church. There's a lot of, one plant that I have read somewhere is edible, and I've eaten it and it's fine. And then a friend of mine will say, oh, well, that's got some pyrazine alkaloids in it. I'm not sure about that. And I'm like, okay, so I think about it. It's a learning process and a journey. I mean, as long as you don't tell people to eat death caps or something, I mean, you've obviously got, there's a line.
Yes, of course.
But there's always things to learn. I mean, I know people that will always eat, that will eat comfrey leaf fritters because it's a traditional thing to eat. But the current thinking is you shouldn't eat comfrey because of the alkaloids in it. And then there's different types. But some people really push back on this stuff. And there are certain parts of certain plants which are edible and certain plants that aren't. When I said about the Amanita muscaria, I was saying, look, you really don't want to eat this plant. Now, technically speaking, it's not going to kill you, but you probably will be, if you don't know what you're doing, it's going to make you very sick.
Yeah.
But there is a way to boil it 5 or 6 times and do all these different procedures. And I'm saying, yes, but if you were talking to entry-level foragers, the best advice is just don't.
Yeah.
The same thing, I mean, I have taken issue sometimes. I mean, the classic one in this country is hemlock versus cow parsley.
Yes,
yes. Now, if you don't know the difference between those plants, the leaves are almost identical. The shape, and they grow in the same places, they grow together. There are some clear differences. Yeah. Now, I don't eat cow parsley. And now I can 100% identify I still won't eat it because hemlock is a cheeky little bugger. And it just looks so similar, it's not worth the risk because it will kill you.
It's so funny that you said that, Tom, because funny enough, our producer, Drew, who obviously emailed you yesterday, as I said, my missus is very...
Hi, Drew.
My missus is very much into foraging. And Drew used to live down next to a canal. And I remember Drew was telling us one day that he was going to work and he was like, oh yeah, Emily told us about cow parsley and there's all this cow parsley on the canal. So I've just been walking to work, eating it. And then Em just said straight away, Drew, don't do that. And Drew said, why? And he said, because, hemlock and cow parsley look identical. I think the only difference, correct me if I'm wrong, is that something like hemlock has purple base at the base of the stem or something like that. Or maybe the roots are more purpley than the cow parsley, or maybe vice versa. Something like that.
The difference is, what's trouble with it is that some people say that if the stem is hairy, then this is cow parsley. If the stem is supposed to have like a sort of celery type groove down it for cow parsley, but I often find it when I can't find that groove or not obvious. I have also seen, annoyingly, hemlock, which has a small groove on it. Right. For me, the absolute differentiator, if you look at poison hemlock, or that's what the Americans call it, but common hemlock, let's call it. This is not water hemlock, it's different, but it's the stem has these purple splotches on it. It looked like someone spat paint onto it,
right.
And that's an absolute and sometimes you could say that the leaves are a little bit darker and a little bit more pointy, but that's not enough of a differentiator.
Yeah.
The point is that cow parsley, the general consensus among foragers, that cow parsley doesn't taste that great, so it's just not worth the risk.
Yeah.
There's plenty of other, this time of year, if you go out, you'll see cow parsley, but there's loads of other things you can eat which are far better at the moment than wasting your time with that. And because a friend of mine, I actually did a radio show with her in Bristol, and her friend, who's a cameraman, accidentally ate one hemlock leaf and was in hospital for 3 days and very nearly died.
Wow.
So it is not a mistake you can make. He's a big grown man. It wasn't like some kid. It was so it's really, really dangerous. Wow. It contains gamma-conosine, which it starts to shut down synaptic connections in your body, which is bad enough. But of course, if it affects your respiratory system, you'll just suffocate.
Well, so there you go, Drew. Yeah. So you're very lucky that.
Yeah, I feel very lucky now after that. I remember at first walking up to Glastonbury Tour, and that was the first time I ate some. I was walking with a lady, and she was like, "Oh yeah, try this," And I noticed
of course, it was in Glastonbury. They're encouraging you to eat everything.
The flower, the top on the top of the flowers. There was
like smoking it.
There was a sweetness to it. It was almost you could chew it and spit out. It was like there was a bit of a sweet tinge to like the flowers, and that was just quite nice and interesting. So had a bit of it, but
I think it's.
I don't think hemlock's sweet, as far as I know.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying to everybody: be careful what you're doing in Glastonbury and who you're listening to.
Exactly. Yeah, stay in the pyramid stage. Yeah. But I think with Death Cap, which will absolutely end you. From what I'm told, and I don't know who found this out and how long they were with us for, but apparently it's delicious. What happens with it is the amatoxin in it. You'll eat the Death Cap and you'll feel literally like hell on earth for 3 days, 4 days. Every single orifice is coming out like someone's jumped on a toothpaste tube, and you'll just be sick and everything. And then you'll make a complete recovery for 1 day, and then you're dead.
Wow.
What it absolutely destroys your liver. The only cure for Death Cap is a liver transplant. Wow. It's like having massive paracetamol poisoning or something like that, and it's really, really, and the same for Destroying Angel. Pretty much the same for Panther Caps. And I see there's one of this brings me on to what we just talked about. Lookalikes is one of the big reasons that people don't get involved in foraging, and it's fair to say lookalikes are terrifying. Panther Cap has a very similar lookalike, which is something called a blusher. And if you were to look straight down on top of it, I mean, to the untrained eye, they're very, very, very similar. The difference with a blusher, it has slightly pink around the gills. Now, a blusher is perfectly edible. It's absolutely delicious, and I've eaten it myself. But even I'm very careful because the Panther Cap is not something you want to accidentally eat. So the lookalikes is a good thing to talk about with foraging because people find it fascinating. Because there's a big thing at the moment because everyone's out after wild garlic. It's the wild garlic season, yay! But people go out and they grab handfuls of it. And amongst the wild garlic, there's two plants that you will find. One is one that's called Lords and Ladies, or cuckoo pint, which contains huge amounts of calcium oxalate. So if you were to bite into a leaf of cuckoo pint, it's like eating sandpaper because it's tiny little glass. And God forbid if you wipe your ass with it. And the other one, because the leaves are big, so someone wouldn't know. They think it was a dock leaf, and it does happen. The other one is something called dog's mercury, and it grows all amongst it. And although I know the difference, but if you're taking handfuls of this stuff, you might not see, and it's also very, very poisonous. And so, back to what I always say about foraging is don't rinse nature. Just pick. I know it's a bit of a pain, but try and pick the leaves a bit more carefully and look at what you're doing, because you can get sick. And I know people that have, particularly with Lords and Ladies, have taken their wild garlic home and been sick, and it's not worth the aggravation. Just take a little bit longer and pick less.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, definitely. What are your favourite plants to eat? What are your favourite wild plants to forage and eat? I
have a number. One of my favourite plants is a plant called mugwort, which is coming out now. I saw some early ones yesterday, and it's known to give you. It's supposed to give you lucid dreams, like flying dreams, whatever it is. Now, I tend to have them anyway because I a bit insomnia, but it's very, very nice just to make into a tea, and I find that quite nice, and I'm very fond of it. It's a pretty looking thing, and I obviously can't really describe it, but I have got a film on it, and I will probably make another film about it when it comes out. I'm very fond of. I do mushroom. No, that's to eat. That's not one to eat. Another one that's out this time of year is wood sorrel. Which is one that you'll find, ironically, in the woods. I tend to find it more in mixed woodland. It looks a bit like clover. It's got 3 heart-shaped leaves, very light green colour, and it's got this amazing flavour. It's like biting into the peel of a Granny Smith apple, or sort of lemon apple flavour. Now, ironically, the reason it has that flavour is because of the same substance which is in the cuckoo pie, Lords and Ladies, but there's much, much less of it. So you can eat a bit without being willing to worry about it. And that's a fantastic thing to eat. Hogweed is another favourite. Two reasons. Not giant hogweed, because there's a difference. Giant hogweed is a quite different thing. But hogweed, this time of year, and I picked some the other day, and they have these big, what they call umbels, these big white head flowers on them. But before they're coming out, you have a sort of, like you see on a courgette, like a sort of like the flowers still bunched up inside its sort of casing. You take one of those, put it in a bit of tempura and deep fry it. Makes a lovely. It's almost like a herby pagora, which is a really nice thing. And also later in the year, when the hogweed is dried out, the seeds taste like cardamom. So you can chew them, or you could cross them up and put them like into a curry or onto something. So that's great, because I think there's a lot of people feel that that plants in the UK are a bit dull and don't have much flavour, but actually that's not necessarily true. I mean, there's another plant which is out at the moment, which is another umbel, which is called Alexander's, and it has a big yellow dome of flowers, and that has a fantastically strong celery flavour. You could stick it in a Bloody Mary, which I actually did in my film. And so, those are some of my favourite. Another one that to look out for later in the summer is one called water pepper, and you find it, ironically with the name, quite near rivers. I found a load of it in Richmond, and it's a sort of plant you'll see all the time, and you'll never knew that you knew it. And you bite a leaf of that, and it's like biting into a chili. It's got a really lovely, strong pepper flavour. Wow. So there's lots of quite tasty plants out there that people don't realise. In terms of mushrooms, my favourite mushroom is one called a hedgehog mushroom, which is called a hedgehog mushroom because if you turn it over, instead of gills, it's got these little tiny spikes on it, and it's a real good eating mushroom, and quite common in woods from middle of the summer onwards. My favourite non-eating mushroom is obviously the stinkhorn, which is known as the Phallus impudicus, which is the shameless. Your Latin, shameless penis is the actual definition, and it does look like that. But it's a very clever. It's quite unusual for a mushroom because of the smell. It creates this rotting meat smell, and the flies actually pollinate it like a plant, which is quite unusual for mushrooms. But it does. Every time I see it, I get the giggles. I am a big kid, really, in that way. But I say that this idea that plants in this country aren't, because obviously, when you're out in the tropics, you see mangoes and all these kind of things, but there are some wonderful things. And of course, sloes. I mean, if you've never had sloe gin, then you're missing out. Yeah. That's a wonderful thing. Do you have obviously your wife forages. Does she bring stuff home that you like? Or?
Yeah, so we've made like elderflower cordial, sloe gin ourselves. Lots of little things like that. Mrs. does forage mushrooms sometimes and stuff like that. She edges on the side of caution because even though she knows a lot, as you were sort of saying, sometimes the differences between a dangerous one and a good one are so nuanced that it's just more safer just not to. But yeah, the ones that she's really, really clear cut about, she will forage. But we make cordials and sloe gin, things like that.
Cool. I mean, at the moment, the Georges are still out, St George's mushrooms. I haven't actually found any because around here there aren't many, but they're fabulous. And if you find a good field, I mean, obviously don't go too mad, but you could get yourself a couple of kilos and not even touch, because they form in these huge circles. One of these like trooping kind of mushrooms, and they're real good eaters, really good eaters. And so that's wonderful. The other one that's out pretty much the whole time is the wood ears, which one of my favourite things for them is that you can. A friend of mine soaks them in Grand Marnier and then makes like a Jaffa cake. So it actually forms like the jelly on top. So that's a really cool idea. So they're out and about. And as we go on the next few months, there's going to be lots and lots more coming out. And, everyone gets very, very excited about mushrooms. I'm actually more excited about plants because although mushrooms are fascinating and obviously the danger element and stuff, I find plants always have more stories, and I love the folklore. And I find the folklore one of the most fascinating things. And one that I always try to put a bit of folklore into my films because I find it, some of it is so bonkers that it's a better story. I mean, there's not actually that much folklore around mushrooms, apart from obviously that one about the muscaria. But most mushrooms, there isn't normally a big long folklore tale. Whereas plants, there's always stories about witches and druids and things like, which I think is fascinating.
Well, yeah, you're adding in some sort of like British culture and some history into it, which is just adding an extra element to it, isn't it? An extra sort of make it more dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, because I find a lot of, some foragers go into that and some don't. I just personally find it, it's that old thing about storytelling, isn't it? I mean, if you're going to talk about a plant, you can either just talk about the plant and how you can eat it, what's in it, or you can cook with it. And I'm not a chef, but I can cook a bit. But I just find it's there's there's magic about the lost knowledge of these plants, and people would have. I mean, mugwort's another classic one. I mean, this is one of these witchy herbs. I mean, there's lots of benefits from this plant. I mean, obviously, for example, if you're pregnant, you probably shouldn't eat it because it can help with inducing things like birth, and obviously helping women that were having those kind of problems, menstrual problems. And the witches, so it's known as a witchy herb because all these witches were really just helpful women, or not even all women, but just helpful people who knew this stuff, and they would help, but they got persecuted for it. And I think that they should have been celebrated for it, and that's one of the things I find so magical. But I also find some of the stories around the plants are a bit more questionable. One of the ones that really makes me laugh, and you'll see a lot of this at the moment, is a plant called sow thistle, which is a type of thistle that's not prickly. It looks like a very big, almost like a very big dandelion, and it grows a lot on pavements and stuff, and it has a milky sap like a dandelion. And the story goes that apparently, if you rub this sap onto the nipples of pigs, it helps them lactate. I just want to know how we got to that point.
Who found that out? And why?
Just walk me backwards about how you got to what were you doing, rubbing pigs' nipples at when and why?
I even think that about
long winters.
I even think that about just like milk. Like, who just thought first, like, you see that cow over there? I'm just going to go and just tug on their udders, you know. Do you know, it was a bit of like...
I think there's a lot to unpack there, isn't there?
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's like when we know that you just get milk from it and that's like, nutritious and blah, 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 then that sort of makes sense. But the first ever person that did it was probably a bit strange.
Well, I think they got milk from the cows and the bulls, and they decided the milk from the cows was nicer, I think. and less dangerous to harvest.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, nice. Yeah, I think that's what makes it fun, though. Going back to like what you were saying, I think that's what makes it fun watching your channel. I remember one of your videos I watched. It was probably about a year ago now. It was just you on a beach, I think in Dorset, might have been Cornwall, and you just took some lamb with you, and then you just sort of foraged what was around to sort of have like a salad, I guess you'd call it, with your lamb that you'd cooked on like a little disposable barbecue. And there's something really fascinating about that because, like, let's face it, 99.9% of the population wouldn't do that. They wouldn't think, I'm just going to take this meat down to the beach and then I'll just, like, see whatever's about and forage it there,
Was this the Buckfast film?
It might have been, yeah. I can't remember exactly, but
yeah, because I'd literally just because I went to Glasgow University, and of course, if you know anything about Glasgow, Buckfast is well known as a bit of falling down water up there. And I went past Buckfast Abbey, and I couldn't resist going in and getting a bottle. And of course, I told the monks I'd been to Glasgow University, and they all burst out laughing. Going, well, I know what you're doing here. So I went and got that, and then it was springtime, and I just thought lamb was the obvious thing. It was what we were talking about, Dorset being quieter. I actually was at Durdle Door. I went early in the morning and parked up there. And it's funny how there are plenty of people on the beach, but nobody walks more than about 200-300 yards. So all I did was walk about 400-500 yards down the beach, and there's no one there. And I thought, what a fantastic opportunity to just do something really fun and really silly. And by the sea, this harks back to my love of Keith Floyd, who used to do similarly or even far more ridiculous things. There's quite something. I mean, like, I've got a film coming out soon. I've been doing stuff with a friend of mine, a chef called Oliver Gladwin, and we did a load of films in his garden. We ate all kinds of strange things. He's a really quite adventurous chef, but it was absolutely pissing down with rain. It was it was worse than this weather, and we carried on. And there's one point we're literally wine tasting in a hurricane. and we just, the pair of us just lost it. It was just so ridiculous. But then I thought, we're going to keep this because it's so funny. I mean, because everybody else, it's like van life. Everyone's, lovely sunny days and beaches and stuff. Life is not like that. The same way that people, I've been told, don't make films for TikTok where you're holding a glass of wine. I'm like, well, I'm cooking. Of course I'm holding a glass of wine. That's what people do when they're cooking. Cooking takes ages. You've got to do something in between, haven't you? Yeah. So I like those kind of things. And I haven't done too many things in ridiculous situations. I would like to do more like that. But you should use your locations. Use the woodland and stuff if you can, because it adds to it. Because I remember when I first started doing a lot of these films, I wasn't actually in on situ, and someone pointed out it's far more educational if you're actually sat by the plant. Yeah. They just, because you've actually gone out there and you found it, as opposed to when a lot of content that gets far bigger numbers than me. It's just a montage video with a voiceover. And I always say, no, you put your face out there and have the courage to show your personality. And because also it shows that you really are doing it. You haven't just read something in a book and now you're just talking about it.
Oh, yeah, I think it makes it a bit more immersive, doesn't it? And puts things into context a little bit more as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if you saw the film I put out last night, but there are some very unexpected consequences of this stuff. And I got a message yesterday from a woman whose husband is in a coma. And she said to me that her and her husband had very much enjoyed watching my films before he was in a coma. And so for the 2 weeks he's been in a coma, she plays him my films every day to try and connect with him.
Wow.
And I was completely just taken aback by this, and was incredibly humbled and flattered by it. And I'd been having a bit of a crap weekend and feeling a bit sorry for myself for other reasons. And suddenly you think, wait a second, something you're doing makes a difference in a way you'd never expected. And you realise you're not doing this for money. You're doing it to connect to people. Yeah. And she actually said she played that film to him. They were trying to bring him out of the coma, and so he got a little bit lucid. And she said she played the film to him last night, and he actually smiled. And I thought, so I was, you don't expect things like that.
As a human being, what more could you want?
Yeah, literally.
Makes it all worthwhile.
I feel like my work here is done, So whilst social media has many evils about it, really amongst good people, it's just a way to connect.
Yeah, for sure. Did you ever anticipate, I saw, your Instagram's got, I believe, 135,000 followers now, and obviously got all other social media platforms as well. Did you ever anticipate when you started your channel that it would be as successful as it is?
Not in the least. I've done other stuff on social media and hardly got anywhere. And one of the reasons it just blew up, actually, when I made that Mammoth Muscaria film, also when I made Hemlock and a Giant Hogweed, people love danger and they someone said to me, I can't believe you just walked up to that plant and called it a bastard. And I'm like, well, because I'm trying to hit home with the point straight away. This thing's quite nasty.
Yeah.
So I do like doing those kind of things. Subsequently, a lot of other people have sort of taken up the mantle and started doing similar things. But at that time, I don't think anyone else was doing it quite the same way. So that really, really took off. And so my numbers have remained, haven't really gone up and down since. But and of course, one thing that I was thinking the other day is quite funny is that you have 135,000 followers, but you're not actually broadcasting to 135,000 followers. You're broadcasting to whoever the algorithm decides you're broadcasting to.
Yeah, well, that's how I found you. You just a random video popped up on Facebook, and then I thought, well, I'm more on Instagram than Facebook, and it's easier to follow that, watch that sort of content on Instagram, I would say. So I found you on Instagram, followed you on there as well. Just completely
but
random.
I find it a bit of a con in a way, because imagine if you went to a rock concert and you were playing a rock concert and there's an audience of 135,000 people, but a robot was deciding which ones could hear it.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what you have. And so a lot of people get very excited about having TikTok is particularly bad for this. I mean, I've got a massive following on there, but a tiny proportion of them actually get served the content.
Yeah.
And I think if I've done the work to get this amount of followers, you should be serving it to them, but they don't. Yeah. I mean, you can go through your following page, but people don't. They all go through so I think it's unfair on content creators that because this people say to me, oh, you've got 135,000 followers, you must be making a fortune. I make almost nothing at all out of it, and that's not a gripe at all because I love doing it. Yeah. It's more about the fun. But I know my daughter was saying recently that half the kids in her class want to be influencers, and they think that's how they're going to make a living. And I said, that's a myth. You don't want to go down that road because they say, oh, well, I'm a bloke and I'm buff. I'm going to be a fitness influencer. I'm like, well, that's not a saturated market, is it?
So saturated. And let's face it, unless usually it's the very extremely good-looking ladies that are by far the most likely to make the most money from it, and then maybe the top 0.0001% of genetically blessed men that are on loads and loads of steroids as well. So.
Which is absolutely fine, by the way.
Yeah. Not knocking that. I'm just saying that's the reality.
There's nothing wrong with people being aesthetically pleasing. I think the funniest thing about this, I think well, I mean, it's kid gloves, isn't it? But one of the most funniest things about having a big following is I'm 51. What am I doing on TikTok? So I do actually like to fly the flag for the fact that when I was a kid, and as people are still now, we all love David Attenborough. Now, David Attenborough's 95, I think, but we all still love him. So the point is that I grew up. The thing I loved was wisdom. I loved I loved to listen to David Attenborough because he was so wise. Lots of historians I used to watch and still watch. It's not because they're old; it's because they've learned a lot through life. And I think that the idea of someone who's 21 years old dictating to me about things is like, well, you've got knowledge, but you haven't got wisdom. You haven't got that life experience. And I find that I make my life by making mistakes and by learning, and that's how I have the knowledge that I have. And so it is funny on social media that whereas Facebook, since you discovered me on Facebook, because it's an older community, and actually they're very endearing. The Facebook fans, they're really lovely. That lot, and as well as my Instagram fans, and I think it's because they just want to, they were from a generation where that's someone who's learned their trade, and just because I haven't been foraging every day for the last 50 years, I've learned how to learn and create knowledge, and I've learned how to convey it. And I unfortunately, I'm not an Adonis. I wasn't when I was 21 either. But, there it is.
Yeah. You said that you had a couple of other social media channels before you did your Eat the Country one. Do you mind me asking what they were?
Yeah. I did a couple of things with a friend of mine who's a chef. We did a thing that initially started out being called Wild Bastards, and then it got changed to Wild Scoundrels. And essentially the idea was, and we were going to try and just be a bit kind of rock and roll and stuff. But the problem was that it just turned into sort of like two people completely drunk trying to make a film, and we ended up having a spectacular falling out. And I think also there was no strategy to it at all. Yeah. I mean, it was just making stuff randomly. We used to do a thing called bite-sized reviews where we'd go down to do restaurant reviews. Which was a great idea, but because we were putting them out on YouTube, if you make something which is 3 minutes long on YouTube, it doesn't get anywhere. YouTube likes to have long form content, but I thought I can't make a half an hour review of like a burger joint. So there were lots of ideas that didn't quite work. The thing with, Eat the Country was that I think I was quite pleased with the name. I think the name really kind of worked, but it just seemed to work in, as it was then, the 90-second reel format, because if you're able to convey enough information and entertain people in that short period of time, then they're in a good space. And I think because people have short attention spans, yes. And I know TikTok's trying to go into long form content now, which I think is kind of ridiculous. You don't look at TikTok for a half an hour film. No. But so it's just that ability to get information across quickly in a way that people can enjoy it, and it really lent itself to this, because I realised quickly. So I've had a lot of people say to me, can you speak slower? I said, can you listen faster? Because I've only got 90 seconds.
Yeah, fair enough. So,
play it back again if you didn't get it, because I've got to try, get it all. I got this information. So I think it just kind of worked. I mean, but I did try. I tried that. I mean, for that I used to do stuff, all these puppet shows and stuff I did on YouTube, and again, it was so off the wall and edgy that we had a great time doing it, but it didn't really get anywhere.
Sure.
We did a thing called Haddock News, which was like basically a fish that was reading the news, and some from its very sexually deviant other presenters. But it was a fun thing to do, but there was no kind of strategy with it. I mean, and as with Eat the Country, there wasn't really a strategy either. I was hoping to try and make some kind of trailer potentially for something that might get picked up, but it just turned into this kind of everyday walking around making strange jokes about mushrooms, and now I have a community of people on there who I am incredibly fond of. I think people don't realise sometimes that when you live on your own, which I do, and it can be quite a lonely existence sometimes. When you have people every day sending you really, really nice messages, it's actually really, really good. And I talk to people who I've never met face to face, who I consider to be quite good friends, who I talk to every day, and it's really, really nice. And so, that's a definite message. And that message with that woman with her husband. I mean, those kind of things you never expect.
Makes you weak.
So I think that there is good. It does. It does. And it just makes you realise that you're not such an idiot that you thought you were. You actually serve a purpose.
Yeah, well, I think it's clear that you found your niche, and I also think that whether you sort of realise this or not, I'm sure you have. You did what you did at the right time, because I think we're living in a society now where there's a lot of pushback against, corporate lifestyle, mass corporations, whether it's even little things like, I know, living in a small village, you speak to older people in the village and they say, when I was young we had a butcher's and a baker's and everything and blah blah blah, and we'd only go into town once a week on the back of a horse and cart. This was like proper rural Somerset life back in like the 40s or whatever. And and at the end of the day, nowadays in the village, we have like one little spa. Everything else, you have to drive 8 miles into town to go to a big supermarket. You know, there's that disassociation. There's a disassociation with your food. You don't know where it came from. And I think it's starting to bother people more and more and more. And there's a pushback against it. And now people are getting much more into, you know, growing their own food, wanting to learn how to forage. A lot of people are even like, you know, getting into hunting. I know a couple of people in Somerset that have deals with landowners that go and, like, you know, take care of troublesome deer and stuff in return for, you know, and then fill their freezers, you know. And I think you did I think you made your channel at the perfect time.
There was a zeitgeist, particularly after COVID. I think people getting out and about as well. When I do a bit of content about game, I was actually up for the Game Influencer Award. I didn't do enough game content to win it, but I was flattered to go up for it. And I definitely push that message as well, because I feel there's a massive disconnect between the countryside and cities in terms of like things like. And my friend Louisa from Let's Eat Wild, she sort of pushes this message about calling it wild meat, not game, and I'm right with her, because the word game to someone who doesn't really approve of it is basically fun death. Game is fun death.
Yes,
and that doesn't really work. So, but people when you say wild meat, as in yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. There is an element of that, and you know, more power to them. I've got nothing wrong with that. But I know there's a stereotype about posh people and things. I mean, that people don't like. But if you say, you know, there's more deer in this country now than there has been in the last 3,000 years. I mean, there's 1 million deer in Scotland now. Yeah. You know, and you can drive from here. You know, I drove the other day half an hour, saw 6 deer knocked over on that one journey. Yeah. So if that meat is out there, people should eat it. The animals had a good life. Exactly. You know, the meat is healthy, the meat is delicious, and frankly, that meat should be going to people on lower incomes, in my view, because, you know, sometimes a lot of venison is very overpriced. And I think that, you know, I never understood this concept of health food being more expensive than food. Why is that the healthier food is more expensive, and the people who actually need healthy food, i.e. people on low incomes, can't afford it? Yeah. They have to eat crap food. So I think that things like, you know, why isn't there a guy who, you know, there's plenty of unemployment in this country. Why isn't there a guy going around in a truck, picking up the dead deer, the ones that are okay, cutting them up, putting them into things and giving them to homeless people? Why isn't there a guy doing that? Why isn't there someone going to these big corporate shoots where there's loads of leftover pheasants, grabbing them all, plucking or just getting the breasts out and doing that, or even selling it affordably to local people? We need to get past this idea that it's, you know, it's bad to shoot animals. You know, if you know anything about battery chicken, I made a film about battery hens versus pheasants, and I had to block 25 vegans who were basically being abusive to me and to my followers. And a lot of other vegans messaged me and said, "We're really sorry, we're not like this, we don't know." But there were some real militant people. I'm trying to point out that, you know, I think it's because they didn't want to eat any meat, but it's like, you know, the chicken has some of these chickens are 35 days from egg to plate. You know, and a pheasant, about 20 to 30% possibly get shot, most taken by foxes, and a good number of them live 3 or 4 years.
And also, if you live in the countryside, the amount of pheasants that they are incredibly stupid animals. Like, sometimes you will go out of your way to dodge a pheasant on a small country road, and they will still find a way to run out in front of you, and you think, what are you? You know, do you know what I mean? So a lot of them are just going to end up as road anyway. Yeah.
I mean, I've only hit one once, and it was literally running down the middle of the M40. So I couldn't avoid it. It was literally like it was like Roadrunner just in front of them. I thought, I can't.
Yeah.
The funniest thing about that was that I'd forgotten about it, and about a month later, my ex-wife, the car broke down, and she called out the RAC, and when he opened the bonnet, this massive cloud of feathers came out.
Oh, jeez.
It was all, the whole engine was full of feathers.
Yeah.
No, they're not bright animals, and I mean, there is some rule apparently if you knock an animal down that someone else can claim it, but you can't.
Oh, really? Oh, well, because you could be deemed as doing it deliberately, I imagine.
As doing it on purpose.
Yeah.
My view is the humane thing to do, particularly if the animal's injured, if you have the courage to do it. I mean, I was talking to a chap down the pub, and there was a deer, and he could tell the deer had been hit and was basically beyond saving, but it was kind of sat there on its haunches, looking kind of cute. So, of course, you got the rubbernecking gang going past. So, oh, look at the cute deer, which is clearly dying. So he jumps out of his van and, well, he has to basically slit its throat. And, of course, the next thing you know, he gets this barrage of abuse from people. But the animal's in terrible pain, you know, and you know, you can't just leave it there to die.
Slowly.
And then hilariously, on was it on Autumn Watch or Spring Watch or something, where they put out a deer for foxes to eat, and then it was taken down as gratuitous or something?
Really?
I made a film for TikTok, for TikTok and Instagram, where there's a thing called field dressing a pheasant, where you put your feet on its wings and you pull its feet up and the whole carcass comes out, which is much, much quicker than plucking it. And I was saying, if you go on a shoot and you're given a brace of pheasants and you can't be bothered to pluck them, and so you're just going to throw them away, this is a quick way to get the meat out. You get both the breasts off and then you've got the carcass for stock. It's quick, it's easy. I put that on TikTok. It was taken down for the gratuitous content.
Really? That's mad.
And they said it's animal cruelty. It's dead. And you can see far, far worse things on TikTok.
That's what I was going to say. You see all sorts of violence.
How can we
and
educate people
things.
if they're going to do this?
Yeah.
There was a woman the other day who was putting up content of lambs being born. She got her stuff taken down.
Absolute madness.
And yet, one of the funniest things I was talking about, there was a woman who contacted me, and she's a teacher, and she said she had a stand-up argument with a kid in her class who would not accept that potatoes came from the ground. And I'm thinking, we have fallen a long way from the tree if it's come to that.
Where do you think they came from? They come from then? I'd love to know.
Shops.
Oh, all right. Well,
I don't.
Well, yeah, it just sort of begs the question, though, doesn't it? Like, where do they come from then? But I think what you were what you were saying. What you were saying about hunting as well. I think sometimes whether it's people that have grown up in cities all their lives, or maybe people that just have like a very, have pre-decided maybe that they are. I don't want to pick on vegans, but a bit more of like a hardcore radicalist vegan, maybe, that are very sort of extremist in their views. They have this idea that like anybody that sort of, hunts food or anything like that is this like gun-toting maniac that just like relishes in the death of animals. Whereas really, like, so, for the person that I know that, as I said, has got sort of a deal with a landowner in the Quantocks, and he sort of shoots some deer. So they're all the deer he shoots are old, troublesome male deer. That usually, if they are not killed, or if unless they obviously die naturally, they usually will often kill younger males because they don't want the competition. This, in the long run, can lead to inbreeding between deer populations, which can cause diseases. There's a host of issues with things like that. So it's most, if not all, hunters do it incredibly, very, very ethically. You're actually doing the ecosystem a favour, really. You're taking care of an old deer who's lived a wild, natural life, who probably would die probably a worse death in nature, regardless of what that was, whether it hurt itself and then slowly died, something got infected and then it died horribly in pain. If you get like an ethical hunter that knows where to put the bullet, it's gone, and it never even realised it. And you're doing the ecosystem a favour. It's good for deer breeding populations, and
well, most animals starve to death, and I put that on one of my films. I didn't know that. What do you think? You think they sit in a bed with their family sitting around while they're euthanized?
Yeah.
They starve to death, and I mean all the reasons you mentioned and lots more with the deer. When I did a deer stalk a couple of years ago, and this guy was an absolute legend. He'd already been. I mean, we started in the dark. He'd already been out and walked the course in the dark on his own. He knew everything. He knew every leaf, every bird, every track. And he basically, there was a couple of deer that we saw, and they weren't the right deer to take. And I said, should we shoot that one? He said, you shoot that deer, I'll punch you in the face. He said, he was absolutely adamant. You can only shoot an animal, just like you said, which was no longer a breeding animal, a bit older. There was no way he'd let you shoot an animal that was good for the herd. They really care about this stuff. Yeah. This myth about, it's like farmers. I was talking to a chap who does these collars for cows. The farmer's got an app, and it tells you whether the cow's ready to have children, or whether with milk or whatever, or it's ill. And he said that if a farmer knows that one of his animals is ill, he will not be able to sleep, and not just because of the money. He just they can't bear the suffering. I mean, he said he was a farmer that had to shoot young male calves because they're like, let's say there's something like a male Jersey cow where there's no meat on them, and so it's just not economical for the farmer. And he said they're literally in tears, these farmers, having to do this, but they have to do it for economic reasons. But people they have this idea that people go, it's just meat, we don't care. Well, it's not true. It is not. I mean, there are exceptions, of course, and it isn't anything against vegans either. Most of the vegans, I know plenty of vegans who are very, very nice. There are militant people in every group of society. There are militant people, and unfortunately, they're not. You're entitled to make whichever choices you want. But I personally choose to eat meat, but I try my best, and I can't. I mean, I don't have much money. I can't always afford to eat the most ethical meat, but when I can, I do. Yeah. And I encourage people to try it. I mean, last week I was up at a farm in Yorkshire, and we shot some pigeon. and had that for dinner, and it's one of my favourite meats. It's delicious. You're not going to run out of pigeons,
that's for sure.
And and it's healthy. So the animal had a good life, but it's just about education and breaking those stereotypes. The whole kind of claret guzzling, tweed wearing, get off my land, type. There's an element of that in everything. I mean, people don't like with grouse shooting. I know that the money with grouse shooting is extortionate, but those moors pretty much exist as very rare ecosystems because of it. Yeah. And grouse are wild birds; they're not pen birds. Mm-hmm. So that's something that people don't know. So I don't know. There's a lot of arguments about it, and I totally get why people don't like animals being shot and stuff, and that's fine. But I say to understand a person's life, have to walk a mile in their shoes. Try living in the countryside and not doing it. You know, try. You have a field and you see that whole flock of pigeons come down and wipe out your seed crop. I spoke to a woman in a goat farm in Dorset. She said she'd literally seen a crow. This is a bit gratuitous. She'd jump onto the back of a sheep, wait for the sheep to birth out the lamb and peck its eyes out.
Really?
She said, when this is your animal and you've seen this, she said, you tell me I'm not going to shoot that crow.
Yeah.
It's. It's not about eradicating animals. It's not about being cruel. It's about countryside management. The English countryside has to be managed. If you put the whole thing out to rewilding, it'll be brambles in 10 years. There'll be no paths and no fields. Yeah. I don't know. I feel quite passionate about it, and I know there will be people that disagree with me, but I'm happy to argue with them about it. But it's just sometimes it just seems like a sort of closed thing. People just will not listen to. I had a friend. I told him about the deer stalk. He would not accept it, no matter how I framed it. And then he would eat a kebab or a bunch of chicken nuggets on the way home. So
really, well, I don't understand. I don't understand how somebody could justify that point of view.
Well, it's what the eye don't see, the heart don't grieve over, isn't it? If you don't have to deal with it, you don't care. It's people don't want the guilt. I'm not suggesting everyone should hand kill an animal, but having done it enough times myself, I don't like the killing bit, by the way.
I don't think anybody does, apart from the odd psycho. You know what I mean? I'm sure there's the odd psychopath, but most people don't.
Yeah, there are people, I'm sure. No, I mean, the only thing I cared about was that the animal died painlessly, and I did. I got it. It was killed straight away. If I'd injured that animal, I would have felt terrible, And that's another thing. People are very skilled at this stuff. Yeah. But, I know. There's arguments both sides, but I think it's an important conversation to have because, we do live in a time when, frankly, food's expensive. If a box of lamb is like £9, whereas you can buy a deer for 70 quid. If you have the knowledge to just gralloch it and gut it up, that's 3 months worth of food for you. We did one with a friend of mine the other day, one fallow deer. He's a chef. He said that's 133 portions of food right there, and that's £70.
Yeah. I think.
Why isn't that common sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. Maybe there's a bit of a narrative nowadays in some circles, a little bit like what you were saying about, do people imagine that deers die, are euthanized with their family around them? That there's maybe this narrative in some circles where, we're horrible to animals, but if we didn't farm animals and we didn't hunt animals, then we would all be this utopia where we were all just running through fields of wheat. Like Theresa May, with all the animals, and we'd all be singing, and it would be like a Disney movie, and we'd all be living in harmony, and no animal would ever hurt us because we don't hurt them. And I think that the truth of the matter is nature is both beautiful, and it like sort of life itself, like our lives itself. We are born one day, we are going to die one day. Nature gives and nature takes, like your channel itself. A lot of the death or dinner, a lot of plants you can forage will give you sustenance and be delicious, and other ones will literally kill you or make you extremely poorly. I think a lot of the time, the best way to describe it is nature is sort of indifferent to us at the end of the day. Animals are just sort of living their lives. If you accidentally walked around a corner and took a stag by surprise, and its gut instinct was to kick you in the face, and it suddenly broke 10 bones in your head, and then you died there on the spot, that deer wouldn't even think twice about that. I'm not saying it would be glad about it. Obviously, it would just be indifferent to it. It would just be like that. This thing just happened, and now I'm going to trot on my way. I'm going to eat some more food. That's just nature.
Just to see the steer in a corner, just sitting there going, "What did I do?"
Yeah. But you know what I'm saying, don't you? Ultimately, nature is just indifferent to you. It's regardless of where you go in the world. And I think that's, to me, that's almost, I think, is something that's really worth sort of remembering. It's just, look, nature is beautiful. Nature it can be deadly, but nature is ultimately indifferent, and we are just a part of nature.
Well, I always say everything in nature is a bastard because we're the only things that get married.
True.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, I accept that the situation with the deer and the situation with the stuff is our fault. There are no other. We are the apex predator, and we have created the situation. But a friend of mine the other day was trying to make a case for reintroducing wolves to Scotland, and I said that ship has sailed. You can't. They rely on tourism up there. Oh, by the way, there are man-eating wolves, but don't worry. I mean, I know wolves generally stay away from people. But it only has to happen once. And also, the ecosystem's kind of moved on. I mean, there's this famous case in Yellowstone where it's 70 years. It's like 500, 600 years since we've had wolves in this country. So I don't think we can get to that stage. So there is no apex predator. So if you're not eating the deer, then you're part of the problem. And the other thing, what you were saying about nature being cruel, I mean, essentially, if you're looking for the meaning of life, it's not 42. The meaning of life is your food. Everything is food. Mm-hmm. And basically all it is nature growing food. And when you die, you either feed the soil or you feed an animal. And so... whether it's a plant you're eating or whatever it is. I mean, I did talk to one vegan who said to me, he said, look, I only eat plant-based, so nothing dies. And I said, well, the plants die. And then he said, oh, well, yeah, and a few bugs. I said, yeah, a few bugs. And then, a lot of these other creatures, when you create a monoculture, you have to wipe out a lot of things so you can grow a monoculture. Unfortunately, there's swings and roundabouts to every argument. Exactly. I think we can only do the best on our own to sort of like try and do things as ethically as we can as possible. If being a vegetarian is what is the thing for you, then that's absolutely fine. But I don't attack people for that way of life, and I don't really like to be attacked for being the way I am.
No, 100%. And I think there's, as you said, there's pros and cons, and there's arguments for and against all of these things. Just sort of made me think. What you just said made me think on this. I was watching a video by a guy that I follow, a very intelligent man called Dr. Mike Israel on YouTube a while ago, and he's more in the sort of like sports science, sort of like fitness realm. But he was talking about like pros and cons of basically vegan diets for people that sort of work out. Because obviously some people say like you don't need to eat meat at all to like get in shape, and other people say like protein sources from animal sources and eggs and stuff are actually much better for you, much more well-rounded amino acid profile and things like that than plants. That doesn't mean that plant proteins aren't good and things like that. But he was saying this one person said to him like, well, if you're eating a cow and a cow gets all their nutrients from the grass, well then how can you say a cow is more nutritious than the grass? If you just ate the plant that the animals that you're eating are eating, then you can get all the nutrients from that. And I thought he said a great thing. He said, well, if you want to take that logic, he's like, where do the plants get their nutrients from? They get it from the sun and from the soil. So by that logic, you should just sit out to get your nutrients. You should just sit out in the sun all day eating dirt. And I thought that was such like a funny but like great comeback. Do you know what I mean? And this guy didn't have like a dog in the fight. He wasn't necessarily being like aggressively pro. He was just trying to say pros and cons from a sports scientist's point of view. Pros and cons for each things, But I thought it was a great piece of logic that he threw out there.
Well, I mean, we apply ethics to nature. Nature does not apply ethics to us. But I mean, it is a very, it's a very emotive, polarized argument, and there's always going to be people that get very emotional about it, and that's fine. Yeah. We're supposed to get emotional about things we care about, and that's fine. And I if people didn't disagree with you, wouldn't life be a bit dull? But
yeah, of course.
I think it's just you have to take every case on its merits. And the thing I used to say to a person, I said, well, if you know about nature and how it works, if you say anything that's sentient has got more rights than anything that isn't sentient. If you go to a place where there's a 250-year-old oak tree and a rabbit, by your logic, the tree's got to go and the rabbit's got to stay. An ecosystem, that tree is far, far more useful than the rabbit, but the rabbit is sentient, apparently, so the rabbit has to live. It's a very, very complicated argument, and I know a lot of people, disagree with it. But at the end of the day, as you say, I just try to be as ethical and sustainable as I can, and
yes.
And I respect other people's choices, and they respect mine. That's fine.
Yeah, 100%. And without trying to harp on it too much, but I find it a very interesting topic, and you said you did too. So I just think another thing I sort of think I've sort of pondered to myself sometimes. I thought is a lot of this whole sort of debate in the first place. It just shows how privileged we are in a way to even have this conversation. Because if you went back 5,000 years to our ancestors, or even 1,000 years, and you were somewhere in the wild, basically just trying to survive, which is such a insane task in itself, without our modern day luxuries and societies, like the privilege of nowadays being even able to say like is this right or is this not So somebody that was living 5,000 years ago, that was in some storm and just trying to find some cave or some shelter by some Hail Mary before so they could sleep that night and just find some food so they wouldn't starve to death. They didn't have the luxury of being so picky. And as I said, there's a food chain. You are somewhere in that food chain. Obviously, nowadays we are sort of the apex predators on the planet. I mean, I don't know exactly when we became the apex predators on our planet. I mean, I guess that would be up for discussion. But historically, there are always different beasts out there that can kill us with sort of relative ease, depending on what you've got on you at the time. Especially if you before firearms and things like that. You're not going to stand much of a chance against a grizzly bear if you're in Montana and it decides to eat you, and you're not prepared for the situation. So.
No, absolutely.
It's a very recent and privileged sort of even conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, as I say, we have made a big mess of a lot of things, and a lot of these situations are of our own making, but we're in the generation we're in now. There's 8 billion of us. People have to eat things. Yeah. To suddenly reorganize the world to only eat vegetables is a pretty complicated task. So, good luck if someone can figure out how to do it, but I'd be surprised. And what happens to all the other animals? Where do they go? How are you going to stop them reproducing so they don't overrun the world? I mean, anyway, it's a very, very complicated, but it is an argument, and I come from a generation where people can disagree with each other and they can just argue. And unfortunately these days it's a bit tricky with those kind of things, but I mean, back to the things like the foraging and stuff. I mean, I think it's nice to sort of dip your toe into the past and to try. One of the great things about foraging, you are in some ways experiencing parts of the world in a way that other people used to, and to somewhat experiencing the challenges. I mean, someone said to me, "Could you survive, in Wandsworth Park on your own, with just what's in there?" I said, "Well, yeah, I could. It wouldn't be very nice, but I could." And so eating, learning how to sort of, because a lot of stuff in nature doesn't actually taste that great. So, learning how to survive with those things, this is what people had to, this is what they had, this is what they had to deal with. We are in a world now of many, many choices and many, many, flavors and different things we can eat, but they didn't have that. I mean, even though spices were coming into this country, 500-600 years ago, peasants didn't have them.
No.
They had whatever they could find, so. Yeah, it's a nice way to sort of, and I think it's a nice way to get very grounded to foraging, and as long as you don't, abuse it. I mean, I do get annoyed when I see someone who's got a massive basket full of mushrooms. I think, come on, dude, there's no need for this. But going out and just sort of, saying, okay, there would have been a normal morning for someone living in the countryside would have gone out, and this is the time of year, and this is what they'd have eaten. I also think that there's a thing to be said about seasonal eating. I think. I was going to have some T-shirts made that says something like "No avocados this Christmas, bitch," because
I love the fact that to you the addition of "bitch" was necessary.
Absolutely, or strawberries, or something, because I mean, I used to eat strawberries at Christmas, and I'm sure someone will probably buy some and present them to me this Christmas, but I wouldn't buy strawberries at Christmas. I'm a massive fan of. My mother we'd pick blackberries, and then she'd have like loads of apples, and we'd basically the fridge would just be full of like mixed up blackberry and apple stuff, and we'd have apple pie or apple crumble all through the winter, and we loved it. Or we'd have rhubarb full, or she'd pick the gooseberries, and we'd have gooseberry full and stuff. And it was great, and it's only like in the last, sort of 20 years, people are sort of like eating. Sort of tunnel-grown strawberries and things, which never taste as good as summer strawberries. I think our bodies are actually supposed to eat seasonal things. We sometimes wonder these days why our bodies are all changing. People are getting more asthma and people are getting more peanut allergies and stuff. And I don't know whether that's because the evil, Illuminati are putting weird chemicals into our food. But I also think the fact that we are also eating things that we didn't used to eat at this time of year, and we're also eating playing fair to the vegans. We eat far too much meat. When I was a kid, we'd have like roast chicken on a Sunday, and maybe a bit of minced beef during the week. But most of the time, we just ate things like pasta or cheese on toast or baked beans on toast. Meat, like a roast meal was a luxury. You go into London, there's plenty of people that eat a KFC every day. Our bodies are not designed for that, so we do eat too much meat, definitely. And if we didn't eat so much meat, we wouldn't have to have battery hens and battery farms. But that's something that's being conditioned to us by marketing. So, that's a whole other argument there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it really depends also where you live on on the earth. I mean, I was really interesting. I looked into it was like a chart of all hunter-gatherer societies that are still on the planet, and it was like 100, or like 100 of them or something, in all different places across the earth. And the main things that obviously it really depended where these people lived. So in some of these places, some of these tribes, there was little to no meat. Others, there was an abundance of meat. But I think on average, most of them, the main things they were eating was fruit most, and then meat second, and actually vegetables after that. So it was mainly fruits, and then after that meat. But obviously there was some variation depending. There was, I think there was only something radical, like 3 out of 100 tribes that had completely meat-free diets. Obviously, there were some that were radical the other way, where there was about 5 or something that were almost carnivorous, but most of them were something like 70% fruit, like 25% meat, and then 5% vegetable, something like that. Which I thought was I just thought that was very interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's true. I mean, and I bet you they're incredibly healthy as a result. I mean, if you look at the Mediterranean diet, I mean, sure, you have lasagna and bolognese and stuff, but most of the main dishes are things like pizza. And if you've ever eaten a bit of pizza in Rome or in Naples, probably won't even have cheese on it. It's just bread with a bit of tomato. It's lovely, and bruschetta and pasta and olive oil and things like that. They eat huge amounts of fruit and vegetables compared to us out there, and they live long, healthy lives. I mean, I love meat. I can't help it. It's one of my favorite things. I love the taste, the texture, everything. But I do appreciate that a little bit of cooking knowledge, and you can eat far less of it. You don't need it. I think we also grew up. I grew up in a with school dinners with soggy broccoli and poorly cooked things. So I was, to some extent, was put off vegetables by crap cooking when I was a kid. There are ways to cook. I could eat asparagus all day long. I mean, when we would go a frying in colour, but. But I could eat vegetables cooked well, properly, definitely. But I think it's just I don't know. I think a lot marketing's got a lot to do with it. I think people have this idea that they can just eat meat all the time, and I think that if we ate less, then we wouldn't be so worried. We wouldn't be at each other's throats about this so much. It's got a bit excessive.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the argument with that, with like how much is too much. I think that would be sort of like my question to that. Also, I think I think you can get into so many nitty gritties with stuff like that. So obviously, we are omnivorous animals. Like bears and dogs and things like that. So we can eat all sorts of things, and it's interesting, isn't it, to compare, say, maybe more strictly carnivorous animals with herbivorous animals. So you see herbivorous animals like cows, or if you go to Africa, like zebra and stuff like that, they pretty much have to eat all day long because the food that they're eating is very low nutrient dense. So what they essentially are is food processing factories, and that's why often, no offense to these animals, they're very, very stupid. They have to, their bodies have to be just food processing plants. They eat all day long. They eat, sleep for a little bit, wake up, eat. Whereas obviously something like a lion, because meat is very, very nutrition dense, they can eat, kill an animal, they'll stuff themselves full of meat, and then they don't need to eat for days and days and days because it's so nutrient dense. Obviously we're sort of a bit more complicated than that because we're omnivorous animals, so we can sort of do both. We can sort of graze. As you said, our day-to-day food, the majority of it can be plant-based, fruits, vegetables, things like that, bread. Obviously, everyone's a big fan of bread. And then supplement that with a nice, big, hearty piece of meat every now and again. It just depends on what your idea of every now and again is, which is much more nutrient-dense, which will probably leave you a bit more satiated, full, and carry you for a bit longer.
But I think also anyone who's lived on a budget, and I pretty much lived on a budget most of my life, if you're trying to live on a budget, you try and not eat carbohydrates. Everything that's carbohydrates is cheap. Pasta's cheap, bread's cheap,
That's true.
Biscuits. You want to eat lovely organic vegetables and free-range chicken. You can't afford it.
That's true.
And so you might end up eating vegetables which are cheap, but the vegetables which are cheap have probably been imported from somewhere else, and so you've got the carbon thing that goes with that. And I was talking to a local farmer the other day, and he was saying that the problem is that it's very expensive, and they have to sell their produce at very high prices to eat local food and local seasonal food. So there's definitely that caveat with it as well, and that's just the way that the world is. And going to buy a bag of sprouts which are British made as opposed to a bag of sprouts from Spain, and the Spanish ones are £1 cheaper. I mean, if you're single parent, struggling, it's a no-brainer. Same with chicken. I mean, chicken, I have seen, I think it was Aldi or Lidl, but they had we actually were selling organic chickens at about £7, which is pretty impressive. But then when you go to Tesco, you get a massive chicken for £3.50.
Well, that's it, yeah.
You know, if you're on a budget, so I mean, the thing that I would say was that is if you're going to buy a chicken like that, try and see if you can string it out over 4 meals.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, which you can, you know. But yeah, I mean, you know, I think, and one thing about you know, I say I don't really get into politics, but the government don't seem to push for us to eat healthier.
No.
They don't seem. You know, they'll whine at us about smoking whilst charging £18 a packet of cigarettes, and they're quite happy for people to spend all that money on tax. You know, they whine at us about drinking, but they don't stop us drinking because they make so much money from it.
That's true. Yeah.
They don't make much tax from lettuce. They don't make much tax from healthy food, so they don't encourage us to eat it. And they're quite happy for us to eat any old crap. You know, I think that they should be pushing for that. And as I say, back to a point I made a while ago. Healthy food should be for people without much money because they are the people who are going to be. You're worried about the NHS. It's people who have got poor nutrition are the ones that are going to be ending up in hospital.
Prevention
you
beats
you want to do good by the.
Prevention
if you want to do good by the population, give the healthy food to the poorer people. And rich people have got the enough money to be able to make whichever choice.
Yeah.
But poorer people should be given the healthier food, and they're not. I had a friend who was a teacher in America, and he was at a school where he was teaching in Brooklyn. A lot of the kids there were from poor backgrounds, a lot of black and Hispanic kids and white kids too. But they didn't have much money, so they had to make their parents had to make very poor dietary choices, and they were eating chicken with steroids and things. And he said particularly some of the girls, he said their bodies were developing far too fast and putting on far too much weight, not because they're eating too much, but because the quality of the food they're eating has got steroids in it and things like that, because it's cheap crap.
I remember. I'm sorry. I remember reading recently that the amount of 20-year-olds nowadays that have hormonal issues, both with young men having either a lack of testosterone or too much estrogen or a bit of both, and the same sort of problem with women as well, and how it's like this really like common thing nowadays. And it just goes to show it's exactly what you're saying. It's because of all the steroids and stuff and other things. Apparently also because of, it's going a little bit off topic, but apparently also because a lot of birth control, that are sort of in women's urine.
It's got into the water system.
Ends up going back into the water system. And so like men are drinking like water with estrogen in it and stuff and things like that, and it's affecting a lot of men's testosterone. And I've joked to a couple of my friends as like younger brothers and stuff. So, a couple of friends that I've got like brothers that are like 10 years younger than us and stuff. Like they just, I don't mean it as like a joke, as like banter really, but they don't look as masculine as men used to. You look at as like a picture of like a bunch of 18-year-olds in 1978, and they all had like big mustaches and beards, and they were like broad and stuff. And some of these lads nowadays, they're just so scrawny, and they can't grow beards and stuff like that. And it's like, what's changed, But it's all this hormonal stuff.
Possibly. I mean, as I say, I can't think of examples. I mean, my son's bigger than I ever was, a little git. But he's got like a 6-pack, and I'm like, I've always had a Lurpak, not a 6-pack.
The only 6-packs that you had, mate, you drank.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. Well, I always think that's a receipt. It's a receipt for good times past, obviously. Yeah. But I do think that in terms of things like allergies, when I was at school, who had a peanut allergy? No one did. Hardly anybody was overweight. I think one kid had asthma, and so I don't know what that is, and I don't know if it's plastics. I don't know if it's additives. Someone who's more of a scientist could tell me the answer to that question, but something's changed.
Probably a combination of many factors, I imagine.
Many factors, yeah, absolutely. And so kids want to get big these days. They're going down to a bodybuilding shop and eating whey powder, instead of actually, just. Yeah, when I was a kid, people who were 18 were terrifying. That was oh my God, he's a great big. But I don't know. I mean, I think that again is a responsibility. I mean, not that I hand all my responsibilities to the government, but the government should be monitoring these kind of things. I mean, they seem to have allowed the water companies to put whatever they want into the water over the past few months, and so they don't over years, and they don't seem to care about that either. But yeah, I mean, again, another reason to think about. The thing about, with things like foraging, it's like, obviously I'm not encouraging people to go out and survive on foraging, because you'll end up rinsing nature. But it is interesting to eat things sometimes which are very, depending on what farm pesticides and stuff are around, but it's something that you find in the wild, is a very pure source of vitamins and nutrients and stuff, and also it's got quite a lot of fiber, so it can kind of we were encouraged to eat fiber when we were at school. And your mother would give you the bowl of sticks that was all bran, and it was good for you. It sort of pushed you through. Nowadays, we're not encouraged so much. So most things you eat in nature, if you boil up some hogweed leaves or something, they taste just like spinach, but they'll have a lot of fibre in them, and those kind of things are good for you. And also, again, with things like wild meat, it's just a healthier thing to eat. But again, we can't all just eat game the whole time. There isn't enough of it, but there's definitely something you could supplement your diet with occasionally.
Sure.
Because I do think that we are encouraged to it's a rat race economy, isn't it? People are living at home now, not going out and seeing each other because of COVID, and they just want to get a microwave meal and just eat something, because they're just tired and stuff. But then they'll complain they're not feeling well and stuff like that. And
I can think of lots of examples of people that I know that are very similar, and they complain to me of health problems, gut problems, indigestion and stuff like that, and like heartburn and stuff. And I think, well, I don't want to preach to them, but I think I'm not surprised,
Yeah. I mean, it's true, and I mourn the day that this whole working at home thing. I mean, there are lots of benefits of working at home, but when I was 21, 22, going into London and even temp jobs and stuff, it was about meeting people. It was about getting out there, and I think a lot of firms have now realised it's cheaper to have people at home. Yeah. But there's a lot of, when we live in a world with a lot of disaffected young men in particular, and women as well, of course, both, all kinds of people. If you're not there with a community around to sort of bounce ideas off and socialise with people, then it's unhealthy. I think you're sitting at home and then you're eating crap food because you're not sharing a meal with someone. We used to all go out to dinner with work and so I think that all these things affect our eating habits, and I'm no nutritionist, but these are definitely things that have changed in the span of my lifetime.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you're right, and I think partly comes back to sort of social media, as you're saying. There are great things about social media, but also I think people are content. A lot of people work from home. They're scrolling through social media rather than interacting with people really, in real life. And I think in real life, people are probably, there's more incentive to be decent to people because there's more repercussions and consequences for being unpleasant. So maybe you're getting in a more negative headspace because you're reading all these negative comments online from keyboard warriors and stuff like that, and then you're not interacting with people. I remember hearing a shocking statistic recently, and it really hit home because I know about I don't know well, not like close friends of mine, but through close friends of mine, I know about 5 men in the last 2 years, probably I'd say, that have committed suicide. Whether it's one of my best friend's uncles, a guy recently from sort of the local music scene just committed suicide. Loads, and both of them are just within the last couple of months. But I remember reading a statistic.
It's becoming increasingly common with influencers as well, whether it's drugs overdoses or actual suicide. And I don't know whether that's a validation thing. I think it's the problem with social media. There's a lot of lack of validation or over validation that people get, and I think that if you don't get that validation in other aspects of your life, then it's a sort of a withdrawal symptom. I think social media is so strange because I saw some millennial the other day who was quite rightly saying that they were the last. Generations to not have these challenges. My generation was some of the first to be parents to deal with it. And my kids seem to be relatively balanced with it, as far as I know, but they're probably doing stuff behind my back, I'm sure. But I'm sure they are, but we are literally flying blind with this stuff. We don't know what the effects are going to be, and we really don't. It's like, who knows? Because I always, I think it was Elon Musk or someone was saying that people talk about whether or not we're going to be androids. He said half of us already are anyway. Yes. I always think of a mobile phone like a Horcrux out of Harry Potter. There's a piece of your soul inside that machine. Because I spend a lot of time on social media because it's a way I'm sort of communicating, but also I'm trying to sort of make some money out of it as well.
Yeah, you're a content creator as well.
But at night I wake up and my knuckles are really sore, and I was thinking, am I getting arthritis? I think no, it's probably because I've been holding my hand in this position on the phone for so long. The claw, literally, and I'm gonna, there was a very famous advert in the 80s, the first natural born smoker. And it had all these weird things that were like massive lungs and all these things that this person could a longer index finger so they could tap the cigarette. And it's almost like the first natural born social media person will have a hand kind of like this, and they'll be able to text and everything just with
giant
one hand,
eyes and
and they'll have a sort of face which sort of is particularly good at selfies.
Just pouting all the time.
Yeah, we'll develop special muscles, so we're going to go. Or the men that do the smolder the whole time.
Blue steel, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Or maybe the whole thing will blow up and people will just stop doing it. I don't know. There was an interesting conversation I was listening to on a podcast the other day where someone was saying that they asked 16-year-old kids, how would you feel if you weren't allowed to have social media up to this age? And the only caveat they said, as long as it's the same for everybody, I'm fine with it. Now, unfortunately, that ship has sailed. But, I'm not saying that it's all negative, but, with things like particularly like adult content and stuff. I mean, kids have access. I mean, all it does is ask you whether you're 18. You're like 9. Of course I'm 18. And they've got access to it.
Yeah.
And you do wonder, how that's affecting their brains. We had to go and find it under trees in the forest. That's how it was. That's sort of like part of our childhood. At least there's a walk involved.
Yeah.
But
get your health in. Yeah.
A bit of fresh air.
Get some steps in. Yeah.
But. Get some, totally. So we're only going to find out. I don't know. And there's me, pushing stuff out on social media, wanting people to watch it, and then thinking, well, actually, I'm part of the problem. Well,
I don't think there's any hypocrisy with that, though. I think it's very, this is the world we're living in. It's natural, I think, for us as we are the ones that are living in this society now. We are the adults in this society, so it's natural for us to ponder, the ramifications. Not of our actions necessarily specifically, but the ramifications of what we are doing as a society and stuff like that, and just debate the pros and cons of that. I think that's very natural. I think we should obviously be doing that as a society. I don't think that makes us hypocritical or anything like that.
Not at all. I mean, I say there are lots and lots of benefits from it. I mean, I think from an educational perspective, I mean, if you look at kids going to university, coming out with these huge amounts of debt, most of the stuff I've learned, like even in my job outside of this, as a content creator, if I don't know something about how to film something and I've got a film shoot with a client tomorrow, I'll just go on YouTube and find it out.
Yeah.
I don't need to go on a 6-month university course to learn how to do it. Someone online will explain it to me for nothing.
Yeah, sure.
I don't get a massive student loan as a result. And the problem I've always had with the university is that I appreciate, obviously, the vocational careers is different, but in general sort of things, you're not guaranteed a job. What else would you spend £50,000 on and not be guaranteed a job?
Yeah, for sure.
So that's what concerns me about it, and I think that you should be. There should be some. If you're going to come out, start life with 50,000. I mean, I've got debt now. I couldn't cope with £50,000 worth of debt now. I'd be absolutely screwed.
Yeah.
Without a guarantee of an income.
Yeah.
So I know you don't have to pay it back till you have an income, but it's still hanging over your head.
Oh yeah.
And I find it very strange. I think that you should say, right, it's going to cost you £50,000, but you will get a job. Yeah. No one's ever asked me once about my degree since I left university.
There you go. I think you can see videos online of like frustrated young men and women saying I spent all these years in this education and got this degree and I work in Starbucks or whatever and I get talked to like rubbish by half of the people that come in and stuff like that. And I can't get a job. They've got all this debt, and how depressing must that be for them and disillusioning? If that's a word.
It's not a great start in life, is it? To be perfectly honest, I mean, I think, do they give them, as part of their university degree, do they give them debt counselling and let them know how to cope with debt? Do they explain to them what life's going to be like with that hanging over your head and how that's going to affect? I mean, does a student loan affect your credit rating? I don't know. Does it? It's all very confusing to me. I mean, my kids want to go to university. I had a great time there, so I can't discourage them from it. And I wouldn't. It is a fantastic experience. But I'm very fortunate. When I was at university, my fees were paid for by the government, and I don't understand why they can't do it now.
Yeah.
Why can't they do it now? If we're building a workforce, they're building entrepreneurs. Why can't the government pay for fees? They do it in other countries.
You think that it's just an investment in your future, isn't it? You think.
No, I think they should. I think they should pay for fees and contribute to their living expenses the way that they used to. I don't understand why they can't do it because, without these minds, we're screwed. We have to have people learning this stuff. They're happy to give everybody these A star things so they can get into university. They can at least have the presence of mind to help them through it. Oh boy, we got off topic. Brilliant.
Yeah, no. Well, I think sometimes though that's where some of the most interesting conversations are had because once you sort of get past the introduction stage, you let the conversation flow. It becomes a bit more of a, it goes past more of like a traditional, I guess, radio. I don't like the term interview because I don't know. I don't like it. But it goes past that more like question answer and into more of like an authentic conversation, as if I met you down the pub or met you somewhere. And I think that's where the best.
Well, I agree.
Are.
I like the long form content. And we always used to think it'd be really funny if you had an app that recorded your conversation and then it showed you how you got there.
Yeah.
Took you back all the steps.
Branching.
Wow, how did we get there to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a
100%, mate. 100%.
It's the natural flow of a conversation, isn't it? Absolutely. And these are all things that all people are thinking about. Even if you touch on subjects which are a little controversial with people, like vegetarian versus meat eater thing, they're all conversations that people are having with each other. It's just that occasionally someone online decides to jump on your back because of it. But really, we live in a free country where you're entitled to make those choices either way, and we should be proud of that. That we have 100%. That freedom, not pushing our ideas upon other people. I mean, I'm very much against pushing your ideas on other people in any context.
And I think that's the problem.
I tell people about my stuff about foraging and stuff. I'm not forcing them to forage.
And I think that's a bit of like a modern problem, isn't it? That seems to have emerged for some reason within the last 10 years or so. Is that it's almost like a dictatorship mentality, that some people have, in all the radical sectors of life. I don't know why more radical people in general seem to be emerging in our society. I can't remember it from when I was young. I grew up in the 90s. And I just, and the sort of, 2000s, I can't remember people being, people were a bit more like centre line in those days. It seems to me, from my memory at least, there seems to be a lot more like more radicalisation going on in all walks of life. Much more us versus them mentality, almost like football hooligan type mentality. You hear about back in the day. People would talk about there's these violent football gangs and stuff. Oh, you don't want to walk right down this street if you support this team. But it's like that almost like with every idea. It seems like in every area of life nowadays, whether it's left versus right politics, vegan versus non-vegan, all these sectors. And obviously, as you said, there are obviously lots of decent people in all of these different places as well. But the radical, sections of all of these ideologies just seem to be growing, and it's so strange. This dictatorship, like us versus them, almost like if you don't agree with me, then you're the enemy, and I almost like wish violence upon you. Very strange.
Yeah, it's a cult-like mentality.
Yeah.
But I do say that I think it gets far too much press because one of the things that I've learned on this journey is that, particularly when I was on the van and stuff, the amount of people who I'd never met before, like come over, we'll have breakfast with us, or go for a pint, or if you need to have a shower, you can use a shower and stuff. My view is that most people are good, and I think that a lot of the bad people just get too much press because the news loves it. It loves to build it up, and there are definitely radicals. I said there's radicals in every conversation, left, right, everything. There's radical people. When I was a kid, or same for you in the 90s, you could have a friend who voted for a different political party or had a different view on something. But that was only one thing you differed on. Everything else was fine. So you accepted that. You just didn't talk about it, or you didn't fight about it. But I think that I don't know who is encouraging this, and there's lots and lots of theories and conspiracy theories about it. But my experience from literally going all over this country and Scotland and Wales and meeting people is that actually most people are decent, good people, and they don't and they think a lot of things that they're not allowed to say because they're frightened to say them.
That's a big thing,
But actually, most people are rational, and they just want the quiet life, so they stay out of it. So actually, the voices of reason are actually silenced because they just don't want to get involved. If you were to have referendums on these subjects, you'd soon find how many people actually thought these things. Of course, no one would say yes because they don't want to get told them. But, I think it doesn't matter which subject it is, and it doesn't really matter which, because I'm not a political person. It doesn't matter which side you are, wherever. I think they're all a bunch of numpties, frankly. I don't understand why we simply can't have a government based on common sense. Why can't every idea be balanced on its merits and say, well, that's the best affordable that helps the most people, let's do that. Why can't we do that? Why do we even have to have left and right? But I suppose it's sort of like, it's like a tradition,
I think you're right, yeah.
Just if you look at a business, you're running a business. You can't say, "Well, I'm terribly sorry. Your idea will save us loads of money, but you'll have the wrong political leaning, so we're not going to do it." It's like business is business. It does what it does. Obviously, within you have to be humanitarian about it. You can't just but just common sense. If the Liberal Party ever got themselves together, I'd vote for them because at least they're down the middle.
Sure. Yeah.
but they don't seem to manage to do it, unfortunately. Maybe it's because they pick yellow. I'm not a big fan of it.
I think that's part of the problem, though, isn't it? I think nowadays as well. I mean, obviously, the whole idea behind having a government is that we're supposed to vote in people that we like, that we want to run the country. I think that's sort of been got lost in itself. Nowadays, people often vote for who they dislike the least, not even who they like. So I mean, there's an issue there, isn't there?
How many of your friends, how many people do you know who actually would want to be a politician? I don't know anybody that would want that job.
I would go as far to say as I think that if you do want to be a politician, then that could even potentially be a bit of a red flag. Do you know what I mean? Because I think what sort of person, even my mindset, am I trying to explain this? I think that if you're the sort of person that thinks, right, I want to be a career politician, and you say that to me, then maybe that would almost give me maybe like a little bit of like a red flag that you're the sort of person that maybe wants to enforce your ideas on other people, maybe. And that already gives me a little bit of a bit of like a warning signal, I guess.
Well, yeah, because you do know. I mean, what I used to find funny was that you'd see the politicians on the news, and they're these, whether it's Labour or Conservative, whatever, and they're just annoying people. They won't answer a question straight. Yeah. They can't give you the answer to anything. And then when you'd see them, I mean, like someone like Mo Molan, for example, when she left the front benches and became more of a public figure, you think, oh, she seems great. I really hated her when she was on the bench, but now she seems like a really cool person, And same for Robin Cook. I used to think, oh God, I can't stand seeing this man. But when he actually did a couple of interesting things where he talked about walking and stuff, he seems like a great guy. Yeah. I didn't know this. I even had a friend of mine who his parents were diplomats in Belgium, and Ian Paisley came to dinner.
Wow.
And you'd think, oh my God, Yeah. But apparently he said, as long as you don't talk about a particular subject, he was lovely. Yeah. You just don't talk about that bit. Yeah. I do think, I don't understand. I mean, in a democracy, being a politician should be something noble.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. It seems to me these days that, one of my favourite comments, I think it was during COVID, someone said, why don't we just shut down Parliament and turn it into Wetherspoons? And I think it seems like a pretty good, because, you look at that, how the way that when they're in Parliament, they have this sort of faux kind of like, oh, I'm pretending to laugh at you and everything. I think, for God's sake, grow up. Yeah. If you did that in a board meeting for a big company and everyone's like, oh, or the old one next to you's falling asleep, you'd get fired.
No, you're completely right. It's very juvenile, really. It's like a bunch of chimps in suits,
isn't it? It's ridiculous. Look at them. Everyone's like really surprised. Oh, they're doing all sorts of corrupt things. Oh, really? Like politicians have always done that. Yeah. Of course, now they're getting more exposure for it. So I do think, this is one of the reasons I stay out of politics, and I've never thought of politics as something that, it does affect my life, but it doesn't run my life, and I don't go crying to the politicians for not helping me. Yeah. I just try and avoid it, and I think to be honest, most people do.
Yes. Yeah.
They just want to live their lives as best as possible. But then certain things impact us. Now, I don't know if you've been following this story about the farmers, and they were driving tractors through Westminster. You didn't see it on the news. Yeah. No one said a thing about it. Now there was, and it is a double-edged sword, this conversation. But they say about subsidies, and then some of these subsidies were put in after the war. They should have probably been removed at some point, but they haven't been removed. And farmers have learned to live their lives with them. You can't just take them away. Mm-hmm. And one farmer said very, very rightly, he said, if you take away subsidies, food's going to be 3 times the price, because we live in a subsidy system. I think in New Zealand, they've managed to phase it out over time, but you can't just say, we want you to rewild half your farm for £85,000. And by the way, that most of that's now going to be your subsidy. It's like, I could be getting that wrong, but there was a farmer I was looking at TikTok, and he basically worked out the cost of each one has to do 10 acres of woodland or something, which they're happy to do. But the costs of these things are enormous, and yet, farmers make our food. Why would you want to make enemies with these people?
That's it. And why should we be importing all of our food when we have farmers that are happy to make it for us, that just want to have a fair hand in life?
Yeah, we can't. I think it would be difficult to be self-sufficient. The country the size that it is now.
Of course, I'm not saying no.
I think at the moment we'd do. Because you've got to have, it's difficult to grow pepper here, for example, or coffee. But I do think it just seems like an odd group of people to fall out with. They make your food. Yeah. It's a very strange thing because, also, I know Clarkson has done something towards this. It's a bit of a sort of pastiche what he does, but he has at least definitely highlighted some of the real challenges with farming. And I know farmers. It's a hard life. It's I mean, the guy who farms at the field by me, it's been so wet this spring that he had one little dry period, and he was out sowing. The tractor was going out there till 2 or 3 in the morning. He had to get it done. Yeah. He probably had to get up at 5 o'clock and carry on with the next thing. And it's a hard life, and I think it's very, very unappreciated. And that's because the government chooses not to educate people about this stuff. And I say the farmers. I mean, God no, the French farmers are hilarious. They don't mess about, do they?
That's hilarious. I love watching those videos. Yeah. Them like spraying manure at the parliamentary buildings and stuff like that.
It's seeing the Eiffel Tower surrounded by sheep. I mean, it's just quite magical. But our farmers are kicking up a fuss, and they're not getting the press, and I don't really understand it. We should cherish our farmers. The same way that we should cherish the NHS. Everyone says, "Oh, the NHS is struggling." Well, no one's actually pointing out. I did a lot of films with the NHS during COVID, and these people are amazing. Kids. I mean, I was interviewing like young nurses and young people working in the scanning departments and stuff, and they're so vocational that they even though they get paid crap money, they're just going to do it because they love it. These people are not being supported, and if you go into a hospital and you go into the back offices, which is where I was doing the films, it's all crappy old ex-office furniture, and some of the machines are still running Windows Vista. I mean, it's shocking. This is. The NHS is the jewel in the crown of this country, and it is utterly abused.
Yeah, for sure.
And why can't we? We have lost our way. In the things that really matter. When you rely on the NHS, you suddenly find you can't get what you need. I mean, I haven't even gone to a doctor since COVID because I can't get an appointment. Well, I don't even know how to get an appointment anymore. You walk into a doctor and ask for an appointment, they'll tell you not to do it. They say do it online.
I'm pretty sure. I can only speak for my sort of like my local practice, but from what I've heard from like family members and my missus and stuff, you're told you can't book an appointment. You have to just ring up that morning, and basically it's like first come first serve. So it's like a mad rush. So and it's basically whatever they can fit in that day. But you can't book an appointment on Friday if it's Tuesday or something like that.
But this thing is, it's like, someone said exactly the same thing to me. She said, I don't want an emergency appointment. It's something that I just wanted to talk about with someone in the next 2 or 3 weeks. He said, "Oh, you got to do the bun fight in the morning." So, can't I just sort of book it for 3 weeks ahead, and then when there won't be a bun fight? No, you can't do that anymore. Apparently,
it is madness, isn't it? It is madness. It does feel like in that regard we've regressed a little bit as a society. 30, 40 years ago that would have been madness. I mean, most people had. Speak to my
5 years ago it would have been madness.
Well, yeah.
Before COVID, it would have been madness.
But even beyond that, I mean, I remember 30 years ago, people would have had like a doctor, an assigned doctor. That would be your doctor. They would know your medical history. Whenever you had an issue, because they had that knowledge of your past history, medical history. They could sort of like connect dots easier and things like that. And it's more, I think, comforting to people to know they have a relationship with their doctor and that they at least know who their doctor is and that their doctor knows them. Nowadays, as I said, because it's all just as a bum rush, as you said, it's like. You're not necessarily seeing a doctor that's necessarily your doctor. It's whichever doctor can see you that day. So oftentimes they're looking through your notes. They're trying to figure out blah, 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 blah. It's bound to obviously not be as an efficient a service or as quality a service.
But if I think about when I was a kid, or even when I was a teenager, there was something like 56 million people. There's 66 million now. So it's another 10 million. It's not like suddenly there's double the population. So something else has changed, and I'm sure that a doctor who's struggling with this will be able to give a far clearer answer as to what it is that's happened.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if I was rich, which I'm not, and I probably never will be, I would go private, not because I don't want to use the NHS, but because I want to take pressure off it, so that people who aren't rich can use it. I think it should be means tested, and I think a lot of things should be means tested. I think. Things like, the ULEZ, for example, should be means tested. I think that things, those things, if you're a businessman I've got a van, I've got very little money. It cost me £70 to drive in and out of London the other day because I was in there for 2 days because I parked my van, which was broken into, by the way, and no one's done anything like that. £70. I mean, to me, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I only had to go in because I was taking my son in with me, and I had to do a few things. But because my van's a 2006 diesel, it's £70. And also, I was on a box junction for about 12 seconds while I waited for a bus to come out. Another £80. So it cost me all that money just to go into London. I'm never taking my van near that city again. I tell you that.
I don't blame
but that should have been. They should have looked at what I earn and said, "Oh, actually, where is it? I think it's Switzerland where they charge you speeding fines depending on your salary." So there are people out there getting £90,000 for speeding because they're multimillionaires.
Wow!
Now that is clever in my view.
Clever.
That's clever. That's how it should be. And I think with the NHS, I'm not suggesting that people with more money shouldn't get treatment, but if you're like absolutely on the breadline, I've got a bad tooth and I'm putting up with it because I can't afford a dentist right now. I just can't. If it starts aching all day, I'll have to do it. But I just think, oh God, it's going to cost me £150 to get this sorted. I can't part with that right now. It's
not enough of a priority yet for you to part ways with your money. Yeah.
No, I'm almost thinking about tying a bit of string to the door.
Sure.
Old school,
Sure.
Because it's whereas it used to be that we went to a dentist and it was free and it was paid for by the government. It used to be, as you say, the relationship with the doctor. When you have personal things to talk about, you want to have that relationship. Imagine you're getting psychotherapy and you've got a different person every week. That would be how would that going to work?
Yeah. I remember my granddad telling me that when he was a bit younger, if he had a problem, sometimes the doctor would come out to his house. Can you imagine that nowadays? That level of service. Not only is it this absolute battle every single morning just to try and get an appointment because you can't book one next week or whatever, but the idea that your doctor would actually come out to your house and actually sort of see you in person is just mind-boggling to me. Like, that just wouldn't happen nowadays.
No, they did it. I remember when I was a kid, I had particularly bad. I think it was charming, but being a kid, constipation. And actually, it sounds like a funny thing, but actually, when you get that bad, it's absolute agony. And unfortunately, the doctor who was on call is the scariest doctor in the whole thing. And he walked in the middle of a thunderstorm. It was like something out of a Bram Stoker novel. I was like, I couldn't get into the ambulance fast enough. Just get me away from that man. He scares the hell out of me.
That's hilarious.
But I do appreciate. Yeah, you're right. I know in rural communities they probably do, but. Dr. Bottom, yes.
Stephen King's Dr. Bottom.
Why not?
Yeah.
Don't Google that one. I would. I think the quality of service has gone down, and I don't know a reason why that is, because as far as I don't know if it's bad management. I remember talking to somebody at the NHS, and they said to me. They said, and I'm sure this is only an example and they were in the NHS, so it's not me saying this. This is what they were saying to me. They said, well, when they get given a load of money, they want to do a flagship thing, so they'll buy a big CT scanner, which is a great thing because they can make a big fuss about that. But it's this person who I say was a young doctor said, well, but wouldn't it be better to spread that across and reduce waiting lists or give us better facilities or something? I don't know the answer to that. CT scanners are important, and I've had CT scans myself. But I just feel that and literally in the last 5 or 6 years, this situation has changed, and no one can explain to me exactly why that is. And I sympathise with doctors and nurses out on the picket lines, because whilst it is a very, very difficult choice to go on a picket line if you're someone who saves lives. I actually looked at why they were doing it, and they have been totally abused. They've been treated awfully. So just give them a load of money. Just give them a proper salary. But I could be wrong about that. I'm sure someone else will tell me that I've got all the facts wrong. But it seems to me, if your job is saving someone's life, you should be looked after.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think as a British citizen, and as somebody, historically, I've been quite a patriotic person, which I know in itself nowadays you could be attacked for, because it would make out that if you're patriotic you're like the EDL or something like that, which I'm definitely not. But as somebody that's traditionally cared about Britain, being patriotic, is a British citizen, these things are concerning, aren't they? It makes you worried about the future of our country.
It does. I'm that's definitely not a conversation I'm going to get into, but because I do understand that again, it's so polarizing. I'm proud of my country. I'm not proud of everything it's done,
no,
but I'm proud of.
Of course not.
I think I'm proud of the culture and and the great things that it's done. Musically and artistically, and some of the great innovations and inventions that we've come up with, and just the actual English. When I was abroad, I missed it. I missed the cynicism. I missed the humour. I missed the food and the countryside and all those things. And when I hear young people saying I'm not proud to be British anymore, I'm like, well. Actually, what you're probably not proud of is some of the things that people are doing here and some of the political decisions. But actually, most of the people, a country is made up of the people who are in it, and most of the people that I meet are nice, good good people.
Yeah.
They're just the news is not focusing on the fact that, because who wants to hear about nice, normal people leading moral lives? You know, the news is trying to draw us down this channel that everyone's against each other.
I heard a saying
and
once.
I always think,
no, sorry, go on. Go on.
No, I was just going to say that the old adage, united we stand, divided we fall. And if we are all at each other's throats because of these little mini fires that are going off, the government could do what they like, because we're not.
100%. I completely agree with you. I heard a saying once, and it was that controversy creates cash, and I think that's exactly what the media sort of, it's that thing, isn't it? Controversy creates cash. So for them, they're like, right, how can I grab headlines? How can I, if I'm BBC News, how do I make sure that people are watching us, not ITV or Sky News or whatever else? Not to particularly pick on BBC, just sort of random one, but it's that they want the controversies, they want the scandals, the political scandals, they want the stuff that's going to make people go, oh my god, I need to watch this now because this is potential war, or this Labour scandal and this new Conservative scandal, and it's everything is a controversy. But yeah, I know. I think like what you're saying as well, about the country's made up of the people in it. I think, yeah, that's right. I think countries are like the people that are in them. No country is perfect, just like no individual person is perfect. You have your good points, your bad points. You have your things that you've done in history that you're not proud of, and you have the things that you've done in history that maybe that you are proud of. And I think that all countries are like that. I think that some, you have to look at things objectively. So I think that some countries are, quote unquote, maybe better or fairer, however you want to say, than others. But I think in the grand scheme of things, I think, I historically at least, although I'm worried about this country at the moment, and some of the things do make me want to sort of slam my head on the table. But I think historically, whether you said it's about, music, art, culture, the comedy scene in Britain, like growing up watching people like Rick Mail and Harry Enfield and stuff on telly. I mean, it's just, just great memories of just sitting and watching that and just laughing, and I just think there's so much about Britain, its culture, as you said, its countryside. And, and I think a lot of people focus on the bad things we've done in history, but we've actually done a lot of good things in history as well. And I think maybe people don't.
We're an easy target, aren't we, because of that? I mean, I think these things are in the. I mean, we forgive. We've moved on. We've moved on with Germany. We've moved on. This is the past. We can't constantly fight that battle, because you can't find any country in the world that hasn't done something bad.
That's right.
I mean, Antarctica's doing all right, but 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 there aren't many Antarcticans that I know of. But we have, of course we've done bad things, but the point is that we have done good things. We've learned from a lot of these things, and dwelling on the past is just so counterproductive. As I say, the country is the people that are in it. Of course, the idea that these sort of crazy, controversial things that happen are in the news. Well, they're controversial because they're not common. A headline or an exclusive is exclusive, i.e., it's rare. So this idea that that's the norm, it's not the norm. Yeah, sure. These things that happen, of course they happen. There's always going, and because everyone's got a phone now and everyone's reporting everything that happens everywhere, then of course you're going to start picking up on this stuff. But if you go into, I live near Chipping Norton in Oxfordshire. It's not like a walk through and there's just headlines. Every flipping shop's got a crazy headline going. It's like, oh my god, is it mad? Nothing's happening.
Yeah, no, you're 100%, mate, 100%.
Yeah. So you'll find that in most towns, nothing's happening. People are shopping. In fact, they're not even shopping. They're doing it online. So nothing's happening at all. People are just going in there for a mocha chocolate, almond latte or something.
Walking their dog.
But I think it's the mundanity of life that makes people to crave this conflict, and
probably,
if England was such a terrible place, what is everyone doing here? I mean, what are we doing here? We should be leaving.
That's what I always
think. We should be leaving in our droves.
That's what I always think. Yeah,
I wanted to come back here because I missed it so much, and it wasn't just that it was my country. When I was in Asia, I mean, you can't be. There's no room for this. I mean, the censorship there is incredibly strong. You can't say anything. You can't disagree with anybody. And we're going down that route. Going down that route. And I mean, don't get it wrong. Things like hate speech and stuff absolutely have to be stopped and stuff. But if you censor everything, if you take ideas, you say, right, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to think that idea. You're not allowed to say that idea. Whether that idea is wrong is besides the point. You're not allowed to think it. If you bury something underground, it's a seed, and it will grow, into something else. I mean, the reason that Hitler was the way that he was. It was because he felt that he wasn't being listened to, and so he turned these ideas into this poison that is what he did. If you can't, because you can't, it's like nuclear weapons. It always makes me laugh. We signed a thing. We're not going to have any nuclear weapons anymore. It's not like we've forgotten how to make them, is it?
No, yeah.
and secretly we haven't got them in a bunker somewhere just ready to go.
Exactly,
they're still there.
Yeah.
Just because you tell people they can't think things doesn't mean they're not going to think them. And that's where you get awful people like the EDL and all that lot, because they take it to an extreme. Yeah. It's only going to go to an extreme if you don't have common debate about things. People should allow. Be allowed to make mistakes. Yeah. People should be allowed to make mistakes. Childhood should be a time when you're allowed to be stupid.
Yeah.
And say stupid things. You should be allowed to be stupid, and then not like, when you're like 25 years old. Oh, you said that when you were 9. Right, you're out. They're childhood. You're stupid. And you make mistakes, and so I think that I think all of this has been done in the name of good, but I think it's unfortunately it's polarizing us. And like I say, the actual winners in this, if we're fighting against each other with all these little things that we're fighting about, the government, because we're not united on any front, the government can literally get away with anything. And so how do they get away with it? Well, what are you doing about it? You're too busy squabbling about other things.
Your neighbour, yeah.
You're fighting your neighbours.
Yeah.
I've got to say, one of my favourite places to eavesdrop is the north of England, and I was just as I was in the factory shop, because they're brilliant. Because I love the accent, and they're brilliant. They say this, and we're in the factory shop, and then there's this woman and her husband were sitting there talking, and they're basically having a long conversation about how they're going to build a bigger hedge so the neighbours can't spy on them. And they think that the neighbour has built a bigger window and extension so that they can spy on them.
Right.
I mean, who has an extension so that you can eavesdrop? I was thinking, but they were quite serious about it. Yeah. And she said, "Well, we've got to get a bigger hedge." And and the other one that made me laugh was the guy who was trying to convince his wife that someone had gone across the Atlantic on a jet ski, and I was like, it can't be enough fuel.
Yeah, I was going to say, you'd run out about 30 miles in, surely. Like, I don't think they have very big. He was
going. Honestly, love, he slept on it and everything. He has food on it, and it's like. How was he pulling like an oil tanker behind him or something? How did he do it?
He took a paddle so that when he ran out, he went the rest of the way. Like that.
Yeah. We got 30 miles and he paddled the rest of the way. As I say, people love to jump down each other's throats about whichever argument it is they're fighting about and stuff. But ultimately, if we cannot have rational debate about things, then we're just a bunch of squabbling little so-and-sos. And meanwhile, I'd say the government, who we keep blaming for everything, completely have got carte blanche to do whatever they want. We have at some point to have to agree on something, or we're never going to get anywhere.
100%.
Or agree to disagree and just park some things. I don't know. As I say, it didn't used to be like this. We used to think the world was hard back then, but actually, we accepted people were different to us and thought differently. But now,
I don't know if you've had it, but I've had some people that I sort of admired, musicians and things like that, and even a couple of people that I met that I thought, oh, really, really cool people. And then I've seen on their stories later on they've put, clearly quite found out that they were quite political afterwards, and then said like, oh, and by the way, if you are associate with such and such and such beliefs, then you can just unfollow me now, and things like that. And I think, whoa, that is like such a crazy thing to say. Like, that's such like a radical statement. Like, if you don't exactly agree with me on all of my political beliefs or or whatever, then I don't even want you following my channel, and I don't want to ever talk to you again. But because if your like dirty secret is out, then basically I hate you. Then it's like such a crazy. And going back to
you ask yourself, what brings someone to say a thing like that? Is it something that they've said that they're trying to distance themselves from? Are they virtue signaling? Are they trying to sort of make it absolutely clear that under no circumstances they think it? I mean, you're entitled to think what you want and believe what you want, but you're creating divisions, or you're not prepared to discuss these things with people. I disagree with you at that point. Therefore, you're dead to me. Yeah, and it's this happened in the Civil War in England. You were either on one side or the other. In fact, this is why they say that was the war, brother against brother, family, sister against sister, family, and it divided everybody. And religion did the same thing back then. Look at what happened with the Protestants and the Catholics back in the sort of like the times of Edward VI and Bloody Mary and all these things. It was absolutely awful, and it was purely down to this one question, which 30 years before had been resolved. And 40, 50 years later was resolved. But in the meantime, they were just killing each other because of it. Polarization, it can never be a successful strategy. It can never help us. You at some point have to come to a consensus, because we are pack animals. We can't all just be disagreeing with each other on everything. Yeah. We're never going to go anywhere that way. But I feel that there are outside forces, possibly. I mean, they have these bot farms and troll farms and stuff in Asia and I believe in Russia as well and stuff, which feed information into the internet. And if people are not, supervised and stuff, and might be a bit gullible, or they might be angry about something, or angry against society, or angry against their parents or something, they will just, I found something I agree with, and I'm just going to go on this crusade. And it's just like, well, you need to look at things in a wider context. And I think that's back to that point I said about when I was a kid, I looked up to people that were wise, because they had been through a war.
Yes.
They had been through all these things, and they had to. People who had been bombed and their houses had to forgive Germany. Now that must have been a very difficult thing for them to do, but they had the strength of character to do it, because they knew they had to move forwards. Yeah. And I think people find it so hard to forgive, or so hard to accept these days. Whereas forgiveness is a basic thing that we all had. And forgiveness seems to be the thing that's missing now. And I'm not talking about religion. I'm very not a religious person at all. But forgiveness was a basic thing that we used to do that we don't seem to do now.
Yeah, and it's sort of mixed in with that judgment, isn't it? Like, it's like forgiving people, and also not judging people so harshly. If you're like, I mean, I think we can all be a little bit judgmental sometimes. Obviously, some people more than others.
Of course,
but I think to judge someone to the extent that you'll say, like, I want you to unfollow me on social media, or I will not be your friend if I find out that you believe in X, Y, and Z. That is radical judgment. Radical.
It is, and it is cult-like thinking, because I think people feel very, very. I think the problem is that there's this massive culture of fear of consequences. I mean, I'm not on Twitter for the specific reason that it's like a sort of lynch mob that everyone's terrified of, I do wonder if on Twitter, if people actually had to give their name and address or a photograph of themselves and prove who they are and where they live, whether they would be quite so glib with some of the things that they say.
Yeah, but they would.
If you actually to meet some of these keyboard warriors face to face, whether they'd actually say the things that they said. I say that if you say something, what about this? If you say something online which is basically slander, then you've got 10 days to prove it, or you're going to get a £10,000 fine.
I think that's great.
So either you if you want to cancel someone, fine, code of cancel, but you better back it up with some facts, or you're going to go.
It's so funny that you said that, Tom, because I can't remember who it was I spoke to recently, but I said, it sort of dawned on me, and I said to them openly, I said, not that long ago, slander was considered like a very, very serious thing, and if you wanted to accuse somebody of being a sexist, a racist, or something like that, that was a very serious allegation that you better back up. Or there would be consequences for that slander, Whereas nowadays, they're chucked around so left, right, and centre willy-nilly. You say that something's taken, you word something in slightly the wrong way and it's misconstrued by somebody, and then they decide that you're a racist or a sexist or a homophobe, and then you're plastered at that, and then they want to try and get you, quote-unquote, cancelled, whatever that means, where you can't, what does that mean? You're fired from your job and you can't have social media anymore and all this stuff, and nobody wants to be your friend. Like, it's madness.
Well, I mean, cancelling someone, is an incredibly powerful thing, because, if you cancel someone and you make them into a pariah, you're cancelling their wife or their partner, their children, their friends. You're basically causing untold damage based on very, very questionable information, and yet there is no legal precedent to protect you. I mean, the whole reason that, I think Hugh Grant's I just got to a thing earlier on that he's just managed to sort out that case with the Sun. But a lot of those things all came out when there was this case in Bristol where a woman was murdered and the guy upstairs looked a bit weird. And so the press just went, it must have been him. And he had nothing to do with it.
Mate, if that's the criteria, if the criteria is you look a bit weird, then I know loads of people, myself probably included.
We're all doomed, aren't we?
yeah, that would in trouble,
But the guy was vindicated, but shit sticks. Once you said it, you said it. Exactly. And all I say is that you it's all very well to accuse someone of something. Go ahead, but you better back it up. Back it up. Prove that you can back it up. If you can back it up, then fine. But just because, you've decided you've got a following of I've got 135,000 followers. If I was one of these people and decided to just go for people, that's power. You don't want to be doing stuff like that. And I feel sorry for anybody that gets a kick out of that.
Yeah, me
because
too.
You don't think about the consequences of cancer. You're not just cancelling that person. You're cancelling. They might have kids who are at school who are now going to get bullied because of what you. Oh, great! I've done my job.
Yeah.
By all means, root out hateful people. By all means, root out people that are racists and sexist and all these things. By all means, but back it up.
Yeah.
With them facts. Make sure if you're sure of what you're saying and you can back it up legally, absolutely do it. Because those people, they need to be judged like everyone else. But
of course.
Using words like, when I did that film about the mushroom, one person called me a Holocaust denier, which is quite a jump, isn't it? From talking about a mushroom peeing in a cup.
So how did that come about?
I don't know how.
How did that come about?
This argument just got out of control. I think people were shouting all kinds of things, and someone said that, and someone actually wrote this. Why are you calling him that? It's nothing to do.
How did they get Holocaust denier from some guy drinking wee from a fly? From a mushroom.
Beats me. I saw it, and I was like, that is a jump, isn't it? But the fact that, like you say, if you 10 years ago, if you'd gone out calling someone something like that, that's a very serious thing to say. I just laughed at it. I thought, well, you're off your rocker, mate. I don't know what you're talking about. But, 10 years ago, that was a serious thing to do. Yeah. Now, no one seems to say anything about anybody. No one seems to care.
Yes, it's very strange.
That is, it's a lack of human decency, and there's a lack of manners, and it's a lack of thought and forethought. It's just this ready, fire, aim sort of, mental, because they know they'll get away with it, so they say anything they like. Yeah. As I say, I've got nothing wrong with actually outing people who are definitely bad people, but that's what the legal system is for.
100%. Yeah. I think I think it's almost like a form of cheap one-upmanship as well, isn't it? Because it's like if somebody starts beating you, quote unquote, beating you in a rational debate. I'm going to accuse them somehow of being a racist or a homophobe or a sexist, and then that's completely nullifies everything they previously said, and now I've won. Do you know what I mean? Maybe it's like something like that, potentially. I don't know.
Well, it's like in North Korea. You say anything, they shoot you in the face. Okay, you've won. Yeah. Sure. I mean, yeah. If you drop a word like that, then fine. You have one, but you're a complete coward for doing that. You've just thrown out an expletive or an accusation based on nothing.
Yeah.
And I don't know who gave people this power, and I don't know I notice people aren't prepared to regulate it in any way. I think it's just incredibly irresponsible. As I say, it used to be that libel and slander were incredibly serious. In the same way that, perjury is a very, very serious crime. Well, if you say it in a courtroom, it's certainly illegal, but if you say it online, it's not.
Very serious. Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah.
Very, yeah.
I think no
one seems to be doing anything about it.
I think the main danger maybe is that we've got like this, a lot of very young people that have grown up with this everything we've just talked about on social media, and maybe as a result to them it's the norm rather than it seeming so bizarre to us, because it's all in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? So maybe somebody that's 18 or something like that, it might be almost what they would consider normal, so they will naturally follow suit. And then, but in that instance, it's very important. I just hope that those young people have reliable elders in their own lives, parents, good guardians that can say, look, this is a really weird and messed up way of being. Like, for your own sake and for society's sake, don't engage in this type of behaviour.
I say that to my kids. I said, I just say stay out of it. I said, even if you fervently disagree with people, unfortunately, you're going to have to keep your mouth shut because you're just going to get yourself in all sorts of trouble. I mean, it's almost like it's like playground bullying. When you're a kid and we were at school and we're bullying someone, we'd say awful things to each other. Yeah, really out of line things. But it was like forgotten afterwards. Or people shout at each other on a football match or something like that. Is it? But when you say it online and you've got a big following, it's a weapon. Yeah. So it's not like you're just shouting at someone because you're cross. It might just be that. I mean, I fully accept that most of these comments are probably people just having a bad day And they probably think, oh, I probably shouldn't have said that, but it's a bit late now. I said it's online. But, when we were kids, it was awful things to each other. But we kind of like realised that it was, there weren't any consequences of it then. Someone might get upset and you'd be a bit bullying, and then you knew it was wrong, and you'd say sorry and shake hands afterwards or something. But you can't say sorry and shake hands when you've publicly gone for someone online and all your followers have suddenly gone for them as well. You can't just shake the hand and say sorry at that point. The damage is done.
I also think, and this obviously was very respected in the past with both sort of like poetry, writing songs, writing books. Like there's a power of putting something in writing. When you're sort of speaking just on the wind, it gets lost. The wind carries it off. Those words are lost. Most of you won't even remember the things that have been said. It was a spur of the moment thing. Maybe you can upset each other a little bit, as you said, that playground mentality. But most of it will be forgotten. The things that aren't forgotten, you shake hands and make up, and it's over. Once you've actually put something in writing, and countless people are then going back, maybe 10 years later even, and seeing this comment, whether it's on YouTube or Instagram or whatever, there's sort of like a power in that, and a negativity which sort of sticks, and it's sort of lingering and festering there like some poison, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is why I say when you're a child, you should be allowed to make mistakes and get away with them, because your brain isn't fully formed, your ideas aren't fully formed, you're influenced by all kinds of things. I mean, obviously not like crimes and things, but stupid things go wrong. If a kid was in like some sort of nasty cult and they came through it, everyone would like, oh God, you're out of that now. Well done, you've come through it. Well, what's the difference between a nasty cult and then going online and saying hateful things? It's just as bad, except that you've got nothing to base it, except for the fact that you just felt powerful for doing it.
Yeah.
And so there's plenty of reasons when there are people that need to be called out for things, but anyone can do it now, and because people are online watching it, it's almost like a sort of kangaroo court. It's like a sort of, every time you go online, you're standing in a courtroom, and you just got to be, or a minefield. You've just got to be careful where you go and what you say, because someone's out to get you. And I don't understand how someone can sleep at night if they've cancelled someone based on some hearsay that they found out. What is the difference between that and the Spanish Inquisition?
No, I completely agree.
Basically saying, well, you said that piece of wood wasn't a piece of the real cross, right? We're going to burn you. Well, it probably wasn't, and it wasn't, but you still said it.
Yeah.
I mean, remember those great episodes of Blackadder and stuff where they had that stuff in there, and it's like, we now know how ridiculous that was. But it's because there are no consequences. You can say whatever you want and cause all sorts of mayhem, but there's no consequences. And I beg the question: what is the point in having a legal system? Where is the democracy in that? Where the legal system should be like, you can't say that unless you can back it up. You can say it if you can back it up, but if you can't back it up, you shouldn't be saying it. And you can't say it from an anonymous account. If you're saying it from an anonymous account, then it should be invalid.
Yes, it should be invalid. And you are just showing the world, in my opinion, that you are a complete coward. If you're not willing to show who the world, who you really are to the world and stand by that statement, then you've almost made an anonymous account just to be a troll and to be a horrible person. Like, what the hell are you doing?
Absolutely. And you might well be an AI bot anyway, but and we don't know that either these days.
Well, that's it. Yeah.
We don't even know. That people are. This whole conversation could just be two avatars done through deep fake.
Yeah, that's something for everyone listening to debate. Yeah.
So if we do say anything stupid, that's your defence.
Yeah.
It wasn't me. It was ChatGPT. I was in the toilet.
That's it. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I think we are. This situation is getting worse and worse and worse, and sillier and sillier and sillier. But like all these things, I'm convinced that it will come to its conclusion, and some common sense will prevail. I just don't know when and how that's going to happen, and how far down the rabbit hole we have to go before it does.
Yeah,
because there isn't anything specifically to unify us at the moment to keep us away from this. Because you can't be unified by being part of a country, because that is now you're a right-wing nationalist, so you can't say that anymore. So what are you unified? We can't be unified by religion, because religion's an outdated thing full of paedophiles, so we can't do that. So what? Well, that's what they're saying.
Yes.
I grew up. I went to a Catholic school, and the headmaster and the priest were both put in prison for that. So I've been there. I've seen that.
Wow.
So. So people don't trust religion. People don't trust their country. They don't trust politicians. They don't trust anybody.
Yeah.
So there's nothing to unify us, and it's like the fall of the Roman Empire. This is what happened. They just all lost faith in everything, and the place just went into chaos.
That's a good comparison. And it's one that I've used as well. I've actually used the same comparison with the West compared to the Roman Empire before. But I'd like to think, on a slightly positive note, I have noticed literally in the last year, maybe just the last year, there is a little bit of a push back against maybe some of the more absurd elements of our society. I've noticed that wokeism was going a little bit too far. I think there's a bit of a pushback against that. I've noticed common sense maybe prevailing a little bit with that. People maybe getting a little bit fed up because I think most people, let's face it, it's the vocal minority, as they always say. I think 80 to 90% of people are like the normal, decent people that you were mentioning, and then it's the vocal minorities, that 10-20% of radical people that are ones that are kicking up all the fuss and making the noise. And I think that 80-90% of people, most people that are living in Britain are getting a bit fed up of the radical ideas, are getting a little bit fed up of the wokeism, are getting a little bit fed up of the cancel culture. I have noticed online there's a little bit more of a pushback now, where if anything, if somebody is accused of something, there's maybe for the first time in a while, there's more comments defending the person that was attacked than people jumping on.
I'm seeing that too.
Board. Yeah,
I'm seeing that too. As I say, I don't have anything against anyone who has different opinions to me, whether it's woke or anything else. But put those things to debate as opposed to just attacking people and cancelling them. Yeah. You can believe what you want. I know that the original ideas behind woke were noble. I know that was what the original plan was. And I know that they were against hate speech and they were against sexism and all these things. And I can't argue with any of that. That's absolutely a good thing to do. But these things, all conversations need to be two-sided. I mean, the whole principle of science, empirical science, is that, you test everything, and if it breaks, it doesn't work. So you try something else. Everything has to be tested and proved. Yeah. You wouldn't want to get in a plane if basically it was like, well, we're not going to listen to the people that said it needs wings. Everything has to be. And if we didn't follow empirical method with engineering and stuff, we'd all be dead.
Yeah.
And, people building nuclear power stations said, "Oh, actually, I don't care what you say. I'm putting we're all going to die." Yeah. So you have to, and all you have to do is apply those same rules to everything else. Every argument has to be tested and proven. It shouldn't be ideological. It should be, you're entitled to, I welcome the fact, and I'm sure there are millions of people that disagree with me, and I welcome it. Absolutely, you should. Mm-hmm. But have the strength of character to stand there and have a conversation. I love the fact when I have an argument with someone and they prove me wrong, and I'm like, wow, I've learned something. That's how we learn.
Yes, and I think that's
there's plenty of ideas I've had that I've been like, and I've been totally bang out of line, and someone's put me right. I'm like, you're absolutely right. I shouldn't have thought that way. You're right.
Oh yeah, if I compare,
that's growing.
If I compare all of my beliefs now, I'm 34 years old now. If I compare my beliefs now compared to when I was 24, then there's definitely a massive change. And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about wisdom. I think as you grow, every sort of decade you get older, you gain a certain amount of wisdom, and it's sort of you change your views, and you realise, I know why I had those views when I was younger, and they came from a good place, but now I can see why maybe they were a bit misguided, or why they were a bit naive, or something like that. So then my view now has changed, and I'm sure in another 10 years, they will have changed, as well, some of them, But and I think as well,
it's knowledge. It's knowledge versus wisdom, isn't it? It's knowledge versus wisdom.
Exactly. But I think when you're having a debate with somebody in a conversation, I think if what you're saying is right. It's not about being right. It's about finding out the truth. That's what it should be about. You shouldn't enter a conversation with somebody about thinking, right, I'm going to win this, like it's like a freaking sports match. No, it's about seeking out truth, and trying to expand your own mindset and knowledge.
Exactly, because truth can be painful, but it's a lot more useful than lies.
Yeah.
And I mean, with things like politics, the line is very, very blurred. But there are certain things which are just facts, and it's very difficult to argue with them. But I think it's more it's working out why people want to have these conversations and why they think them. What is their background and what led them to this decision? There's a far more interesting thing when you debate with someone. I now see why you think that way, because you've been through this and I haven't been through that, so I can't speak for you. Yeah. And that's a far gentler and kinder way of having a conversation. But just saying, I don't want to. I mean, quite often if someone shuts you down, it's because they can't fight their way out of it. And they're like, I disagree with this guy, but I know I haven't got enough facts to hand, I always used to lose arguments with my ex-wife because she was just better at it than me. She was just better at it. She just was better. I come from a non-confrontational family, so we didn't really argue very much. So when I got into this, I was outgunned. And that's fine. She was better at it, And to be fair, if I was arguing with her about these things, she'd probably shoot me down because she always had all the facts at fingertips. And I think people are sometimes people are frightened of getting out of their depth into these conversations. So it's easier just to not get involved. I'm going with these people. I'm not talking to you about it. And it reminds me of when I was brought up as a Catholic and I was taught to believe all kinds of things that were right and, everyone else was wrong. And I, as a result of, and I don't know if there's other people out there listening who were brought up as Catholics and all the people in our church were lovely, lovely people who all did things for the right reasons and were really kind. But you were basically taught to feel guilty for everything, and you constantly had to apologize for every thought you had, and because it didn't agree with something else. And as a result, I have struggled with my conscience my whole life, really, really badly because of it. And that is because it was a doctrine, and it was a sort of cult-like thinking. And you'll find that the people who want to be part of the herd and don't want to stand out from the herd will be terrified to say anything against it because of they'll get eaten by their own kind, and if they do disagree with something, they'll feel so guilty about it they won't want to say it. And again, this is counterintuitive. We didn't get, we can't move forwards if those are the things judging it. So we should be kind to people that disagree with us, and for whatever reason, and either prove them wrong or let them prove us wrong. But we can only do it with a debate. 100%. We can't do it just by not talking to each other.
Completely agree,
it's
Tom.
very counterintuitive.
Completely agree, Tom. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show today, mate. I've actually really enjoyed talking to you. Obviously, we ended up talking about a right plethora of topics and went completely
chewing the fat.
Off on one, putting the worlds to rights. But I really enjoyed it, and as I said, I think those sort of conversations where he does suddenly get past the sort of the initial sort of question answer stage, and then you really sort of get into things like a bit more of like a real life conversation is actually where all the gold is. So I appreciate your time. I say we've almost been chatting for 3 hours, so that's a good old.
Have we? Oh Lord.
That's a good old chin wag. No, but I think that's a good sign. I think it shows that the worst ones are always the ones where I'm looking at the clock and I'm thinking, we've only been doing it for 15 minutes and it's already, it's already like running.
Well, I was thinking, what am I going to talk about? But it's funny if you're again, because we've been having a rational debate, and it's not like we're, the Mutual Appreciation Society. I'm sure we disagree on a lot of things, but it's just something that we're passionate about, and I think a lot of people think the same way. And there might be, I don't know whether you get comments on these things. There might be people that disagree, and they're allowed to. Of course they are. Yeah, so it's fascinating, but I really enjoyed it as well, and it was good to have an opportunity to chat about stuff like that, and then I hope that people, back to the original subject, in terms of things like foraging, if people want to get involved in that, then I can help them out with those kind of things. Absolutely.
Cheers, Tom. I say, just in case people have only tuned in halfway through, if they are listening on the radio and not on in podcast form, we've been talking to Thomas Radford, who has a social media channel called Eat the Country, or I should say social media channels. You can find him on Instagram, Facebook, also YouTube, Spotify. I think lots of different platforms.
YouTube, TikTok, not Spotify. I probably should do a podcast. I keep meaning to do it, but I haven't done it. But it's on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And it's just about foraging, and it's also about wild, seasonal, sustainable food. But with a bit of a kind of a slightly edgy and a wry take on it, because because that's who I am.
Yeah, brilliant.
I like to think.
Thanks so much, Tom. And for people that are listening on the radio, going to leave you with a track now. This is Through the Dark, which is a brand new song by the awesome folk artist Sam Brothers. Cheers, folks. See you next time.